So, Miguel, thank you so much. And I'm about to say that we're in a WeWork. We love it. It's incredible. WeWorks are so good. We have a office that's like 1/8 the size of our old office, and we like it better because all the WeWork functionality is so well thought through. It is really designed. That last session had some very interesting overlap with the corporate innovation session, in my opinion. There's a lot of things that are kind of continuity elements here. And I should have said at the beginning of the day, what we're really trying to do here, hopefully you've picked it up anyway, it's not a tech conference. It's really about all the things that are happening because of tech and that tech might make happen and that we ought to just be thinking about that have something to do with tech. And then we throw in these startups like AirMap, or in a few minutes you'll hear PlanGrid, who's just doing something very disruptive in the construction business, just to show examples of what is happening in various spaces in society. And then we also do some pretty different things like what you're about to hear. Andrew Richet from the Personal Democracy Forum he's gonna, I don't know what he's gonna say. He kept saying he was gonna send me an outline and he never did. But, so I will have to, it's sort of one of those, the opinions you're about to hear are not necessarily the opinions, but anyway, it's going to be interesting and it's very relevant because Andrew is one of the people in New York who understands what's happening with tech as well as anybody, so we're very happy to have him here.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. David, did I lose a minute and a half because of the intro, or do I get 10 minutes?
No, I don't know.
All right, I'll keep going.
That's plenty of time.
All right, I'll make sure. Anyway, thank you, David, Simone, and the team at Techonomy for inviting me. This is the second time I've been invited to speak, and it's an honor to be here. And welcome to, for those of you who are not from New York, welcome to New York. It is the most diverse and the most empathetic tech community in the world. And if you look at the schedule, it says I'll talk a little bit about Trump. I have to tell you that I finished this talk about 30 minutes ago, which is why David didn't get my notes. And the reason I didn't get my notes is I was checking my Washington Post and New York Times feed to find out the latest crazy thing that just happened so I could include it. So if I didn't catch it, it's because I'm 30 minutes behind what's going on at the White House. But for those of you who have missed it this morning and paying attention to the panels and not to your feed from the New York Times, the Russians are now corroborating our president's story about what classified information he didn't share at the meeting with them in the Oval Office. So if you want to know that our democracy has gone off the rails, we're now using Russians to corroborate the president's statements. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Trump, but I do want to use him as a starting point. And we've all talked about, you've all heard the arguments, the attempts to try to solve the issues associated with the term fake news. But I would argue that we have a much bigger problem. We actually have a fake democracy. So, we once had a democracy that matched our times. It was invented in the agricultural age, and it was at a time when people were working 16 hours a day and actually didn't have the time to delve into the company's issues and problems, and it made sense. Pick some rich farmers, they'll figure it out. And they did a reasonably, if any of you have seen Hamilton, they did a pretty reasonable job trying to lay some framework for a country that, by the way, is an experiment that doesn't exist anywhere else. Take people from around the world, bring them to another place, and start a new country from scratch. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Okay, I stand corrected. But not in the length of time that we've been doing it. But my larger point is that it may have worked in the agricultural age. It's been subverted and manipulated and corrupted in the industrial age. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. Gerrymandering, voter ID laws, voting on Tuesdays. Do you know why we vote on Tuesdays, by the way? Because it was market day, and that's when farmers came to town and they could get the most people to show up. And it's been staying that way because changing it would change the power structures in Washington. Money in politics, super PACs, and let me not even begin, let's not even start talking about the Electoral College. But here's a test to prove to you what I mean. So 4 years ago, Congress voted, not unanimously, but decisively, to force the NSA to stop collecting information, metadata and other information they were collecting on Americans in their system. How many of you believe that the NSA actually stopped doing that when Congress ruled that as being illegal? I'd like you to notice that not a single one of you has raised your hand. Now think about that. Our Congress voted to stop the NSA from doing mass surveillance, and you don't believe that they actually stopped? And what more proof do you have that we have a fake democracy? We got to do something about this, and it's not going to get solved because of technology. Just back to Trump for a second. I'm going to read this quickly. This alternative universe that was published by my partner Mika Sifry from Civic Hall, where President Hillary Clinton is president. Let me read this to you. President Clinton quietly sent her son-in-law, investment banker Mark Mavesky, to Iraq Monday, adding winning the war against ISIS to his growing list of responsibilities, which also include solving Middle East peace, heading the new White House Office of American Innovation, managing the U.S.-China summit, and ending the opioid crisis. The Chinese government, convinced of Mazursky's importance to the Clinton White House, not only has established a back channel to him through its ambassador in Washington, it has also quietly encouraged Chinese State Bank to invest in his troubled hedge fund. His family is also peddling visas to investors for his real estate project in New Jersey. Meanwhile, Clinton's husband has largely stayed out of the White House and has remained home in New York. Her daughter Chelsea has also taken an unpaid role in the administration while continuing to run the Family Foundation and earning 5- to 6-figure fees, giving speeches to corporations with interests in Washington. Meanwhile, most top cabinet-level positions still remain unfilled, although one piece of unexpected news, Clinton's longtime confidant and political advisor, Sidney Blumenthal, has been removed from his brief stint as a member of the National Security Council. Can you imagine if all these things were happening in Hillary Clinton's presidency, where we'd be? We have to be careful of the new normal because it has huge implications. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Our schools are failing still. Our universal health care system, although not perfect, is being targeted and manipulated to create a huge tax break for the rich. Our environment is eroding beyond repair, and the regulations protecting our privacy and security and our net neutrality are being dismantled. At the same time, technology continues to advance and evolve at an ever-increasing speed. And as much as we love some of the benefits of technology and the promises that it will improve our lives, there's more and more evidence that it actually may damage the human experience. And of those of you who don't know his work, you should look at the work of Tristan Harris, who's spoken at Techonomy before, who has a theory that these technologies are actually designed to take our time away and that we're not actually building empathy into the technology itself. But there's also more evidence that the digital divide is growing, not just because 20% of the US population is not able to afford broadband, and a third of the world is still not online, but because the skills needed to navigate the 21st century economy are changing, and people are not able to protect their data and their security. And I'm sorry, when we have autonomous vehicles, we are not going to teach all those Uber drivers to code. We are not going to turn them all into entrepreneurs. And that's not that far away. And we don't have the policy institutions or the thinking in order to be able to address these problems on a systemic scale. So you've probably heard of civic tech, gov tech, urban tech, smart city tech. I was happy to hear this morning's panel about the New York ecosystem, but I would argue that the most successful tech company in New York is actually Crisis Text Line, if you haven't heard of it. Raised $25 million, and within 3 years has become the de facto crisis response platform for every area code in the country, started by Nancy Lublin. It is replacing 800 numbers city by city and saving people's lives by the thousands now. Born in New York, distributed from New York. We should have hundreds of companies like that, not just one. But if a company creates a technology that allows the police department to check the social media profiles of African Americans that they pull over at the side of the road and check to see if they tweeted about Black Lives Matter, should we call that civic tech? Should we call that gov tech? Should we allow that to happen? And how many would you agree with me right now that Palantir is working behind the scenes building a database, probably using AI, to identify where 11 million undocumented people are hiding in the United States and who's supporting them and protecting them? And I'm sorry, I know that we run these conferences based on sponsorship, but I would ask you all to double check next time you're talking to Palantir, who sometimes does great work. Ask them to be more transparent about the work that they actually are doing for our federal government. We are transforming our economy to the 21st century, but we're not transforming our democracy. We need to develop new forms of governance. And they're not going to be based on whether we have people voting like thumbs up or thumbs down on a huge international platform like a giant coliseum. We have to come up with entirely new ways of thinking about how an interconnected society of people, where nation states are obsolete, figure out how to navigate the challenges of the 21st century. And to do that, we need to ground our thinking not in the technology, but in principles and values. And I would argue that it's up to us. It's not up to Congress. It is not up to the institutions of the 20th century who still do not understand fully how the internet works. It's up to us. And while we are celebrating the exits and the valuations and some of the amazing technologies, we have not just an opportunity, we have an obligation and a responsibility to build a society that we want in the 21st century so that it is fair and equitable to everyone. And it's up to you. So when you start thinking about the tech industry, I'd like you to point to New York as the place where these kinds of questions are being asked, where people are organizing themselves in places like Civic Hall and elsewhere. There are 1,800 tech meetups in New York, 60,000 members of the New York Tech Alliance. There is no ecosystem made up of people, not technology, like it anywhere in the world, and I welcome you to join it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, that was a bit of a reality check, but also maybe call to arms for everyone, because I think we do all bear some responsibility, so we should not take it lightly. So I'm going to bring up the next panel that Jesse Hempel will be moderating from Back Channel. This is, by the way, one of my favorite panels of the day, not that I'm allowed to have any favorites, so hopefully you guys won't disappoint me.
No pressure, guys.
Sorry about that. Anyway,
you guys can come up too, but I'm going to introduce you still. Hi, I'm Jesse Hempel. I'm pretty sure Simone loves this panel because she hates authority and would like an impressive discussion on how to tear it apart and rebuild it. But let me tell you who we have with us. We have Rachel McGuire from the Institute for the Future. We have Eli Pariser from Upworthy. And we have Gary Marcus, currently affiliated with NYU, always affiliated with NYU. And I am Jesse Hempel from Back Channel, which is a Wired Media Group conversation. And when Simone and David were first sort of thinking about this topic and thinking about how to have a conversation about authority, we began to think about how authority in the 20th century was prescribed. It came from institutions, it came from experts. We universally decided who those were, and it was top down. And we've seen that become entirely disrupted over the last 20, 30 years. And I think that we've hit peak distrust in authority, but even as I say that, I worry that actually I don't know anything, like we're going way up over the mountain. And that's what we want to talk about today. But in order to talk about that effectively, I think we have to start by defining our terms. Guys, what is authority?
I am the authority on authority, clearly.
I'll take that, Rachel.
Yeah. I mean, so I come from I spend a lot of time thinking about the future of health and healthcare, so the lens I'll bring often to this conversation will really be about what's changing in authority when it comes to how we pursue and produce health. But broadly, I'd say, we're moving from where authority was conferred from, authority is the right to command. Historically, I think it's been structural in nature, that we had structural authority, which is that you had the right to command by your position. So to your point, sort of institutional, but it was also what scholars call sapiential authority or knowledge-based authority. And so certainly in healthcare, one of the key transitions that we're undergoing when it comes to who has authority, not necessarily power, but authority in healthcare is really around that changing knowledge around what in effect actually does produce good health. And so do do the institutions or the entities that have authority in health today actually have sapiential or sort of the knowledge that's needed to maintain that authority over the next decade?
And I know that you have a framework for how to think about it, and I want to talk about that. But before we do, I want to sort of ask broadly, do you agree, both of you, that authority to date has been, and tell me if I'm getting this right, largely about who has the knowledge, and that has been mostly determined by your affiliation with an institution?
No.
Right.
Just to make it interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm not a social scientist, but from what I understand of kind of how trust and authority, what it does for us psychologically, you know, it's helpful to go back a couple thousand years or a couple tens of thousands of years and say, you know, what are our cognitive structures built around? And a lot of them are built around making very quick assessments of who's on my side, who's not on my side, who has my interests at heart, who doesn't have my interests at heart.
And who knows what they're doing?
And who knows what they're doing, but I would argue that competence, that question of competence is an interesting one to interrogate, right? Because I think I'm going to specifically say it's not about access to knowledge per se as much as who's going to protect me when someone's attacking me. I still think that is the primary lens through which many bonds of authority are created. And then I think there's a sort of technical domain that you're speaking about where we have a totally different way of conferring authority. But I think in our normal lives, trust is built through your being on my team or not on my team, and acting in my interest or not in my interest. So, and I think that's all kind of playing out as we see authority decenter because we're replacing a procedural way of building authority with one that is actually sort of much more familiar, which is this like person to person, do I trust the person who shared this piece of information rather than do I trust the process by which this piece of information was made?
Okay, but there seems to me like you're not that far off. This centralized version of
But
authority.
it's more interesting if we disagree. So.
Yeah, it is. Thanks. I appreciate that. We need that in the middle of the afternoon too. Maybe you don't have coffee in front of you.
Yeah.
But maybe you're adding a historical lens, which is that if it feels like this centralized notion of authority is being disrupted, then we have to keep in mind authority hasn't always worked this way. And in fact, maybe in reality, it doesn't work this way.
I mean, I'm with Eli in thinking that the brain can be shortcut, that we evolved in an environment where we wanted quick information about all kinds of things. For a very long time, no individual has been able to do everything. So we've been in a position where we're reliant on others, and we have to make snap judgments about who to rely. Maybe we get some data over time. This is the person, the leader of my village or something like that. Are they reliable? But we often use shortcuts to say, you know, I can't do this myself. And I'm a scientist, among other things. And as a scientist, I have to do this. So I can't do every single experiment myself. I have to decide which other scientists do I think are doing good work or maybe not doing good work. We make decisions like this all the time. And we almost never make them on the basis of enough data. It used to be, not too long ago, that maybe I could trust, say, the New York Times or something like that. Now I get a lot of my information, let's say, from Facebook. And maybe there are different standards there, but the brain is still kind of grasping for that quick fix about, okay, this is where I get my information from. I'm good to go. I'm not going to analyze every single piece of information individually. I'm going to be comfortable because, you know, Google or Facebook gives it up to me. I think, you know, part of why we're probably talking today is that we have a new kind of centralization of authority, which comes from places like Google and Facebook. They don't pronounce, hey, I'm the authority, but we implicitly assume as we visit their sites that they are authorities. And of course, this has come into question as well it should in the last, you know, few months. It should have been in question for longer. But I think part of the question is like, there's a new regime here for where people get their information from and what they trust and how they decide what to trust. And I'm not sure we're that well equipped as a society to know. I remember
a study I reported in a book that I wrote a few years ago called Kluge. The study looked at children and websites. This was 2008, I think. And children trusted the sites based on like how good the graphics were. I guess the implicit assumption is if the graphics are good, they must have money, they must have put this together right. But we all know this is not actually a good metric. But what are adults using now? I'm not sure, they're so much better. It's like, well, my friends posted it on Facebook. They're not even thinking about the fact that Facebook has some algorithm to serve up the things from the friends that most agree with them. Right?
And there's plenty of research that says that adults make those exact same snap judgments when it comes to fake news. And if the website looks credible, just from a design perspective, then they'll buy in. I think my point was, I think, as a group of sort of highly educated rationalists, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess, it's easy to forget how non-rational authority is in many domains. And that, in fact, many of the shortcuts that you're describing are actually the opposite of what we know empirically about where competence comes from. So there's a Harvard Business Review study that was circulating about leadership, and it turns out that the most effective leaders tend to be, very kind of quiet consensus builders, tend to have a lot of traits that female leaders have that men may have less, but that we think of leadership. Our cognitive schema for leadership is kind of a hard-charging narcissist. I'm not making a political comment here.
No idea who you're referring to.
And so what we think competence looks like and what it actually looks like are two very different things, and our brains mislead us on that.
I mean, the simplest version, just very quickly, is usually the presidential candidate that's taller wins, right? I mean, this is, a simple metric that you can use, and it's not a very good one. It's not correlated with reality.
This does not bode well for women in presidential.
It doesn't.
As a 5'3",
we have brains that do that. So, I mean, there's a question if we know that our brains keep gravitating towards these superficial cues of what we're going to do about it, which really brings you into things like education.
Right. Well, so let's put a pin on that. I want to come back to Rachel's framework for thinking about the sort of new ways that authority is rearing its head in the healthcare system specifically.
Sure, and I mean, I guess just observationally, having spent a few years thinking about this, that certainly trust is different in our minds from authority, and so really thinking through, where do you need trust to have authority, and where is authority conferred through other mechanisms? Similarly with expertise and authority, not necessarily needed in all spaces, but maybe there are some spaces where expertise or knowledge is needed. So just sort of noticing that we sometimes use language, we substitute words where maybe we should unpack that a little bit. But
couple those concepts a bit.
So in healthcare, what we were recognizing, like I said, is that if structural authority and sapiential or knowledge-based authority is being challenged by lots of forces that are shaping the next decade, then where do we see emerging sources of authority? And what we argued is that there are 4 emerging or re-emerging sources for authority when it comes to the future of health, and that were the 4 areas were computational. So we can talk together about what that might mean, but really the idea of being able to quantify health in really radically new ways, scale it very large and also very granularly, all of that sort of a new knowledge base, new area to inform how we think about health. Networks, Johnson & Johnson was just up here. They know a lot about the power of networks to inform how we make health choices and where we get information now. Facebook was at Techonomy Health yesterday talking about their play in healthcare. So I think everyone's sort of aware that networks are becoming an increasingly important form of or source of authority in healthcare. Ambient authorities, so whether it's big data analytics or it's just understanding social determinants of health or environmental determinants of health better, this is a new area of expertise and perhaps authority over the next decade in health. And then finally, and probably most critically, and this is where I think you guys have a lot more to say than I do, is narrative, the power of the voice in a really data-deluged future. Who can tell personal narrative stories, institutional narrative stories, and sort of society-wide narratives in a very compelling way that will be a new area to derive authority from, in healthcare at least over the next decade.
Can you just, the difference between authority and trust, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think in healthcare, sometimes they overlap, but sometimes you just have authority because in healthcare right now, it's a who, not a what, that certifies illness. And that, whether or not you trust that authority as the right person or entity to be certifying illness and determining treatment protocol, doesn't matter. That is the authority that certifies illness. So I don't know. There may be other areas where trust is crucial to actually seeing, to recognizing the authority, but at least in healthcare, it's not required.
Is that something that is going to change over time? Because I think about it, and I think about, I recently was pretty sure I had a sinus infection, so I went to my doctor. But before I got to my doctor, I spent a good long time on the internet, and I mapped that thing out. And then I got there, and the doctor's like, "You don't need antibiotics." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I do."
Right.
She's like, "No, you don't."
Yeah.
And then I went home and called a friend who was a doctor and got antibiotics.
Yeah, what we've learned is that,
And got better.
yeah,
You got better, but the antibiotic, the virus.
Got better too.
Got better too, exactly.
Yeah, we don't have to unpack my psychology. Let's unpack the decision itself, because I think that speaks to the way that.
There's a serious issue about tragedy of the commons, though, right? That what's good for the individual patient isn't good for the population as a whole. So the reason antibiotics are generally not prescribed by the doctor is because of the resistance that the bugs themselves grow.
So
And
Gary, I
nobody wants
agree
to do
with
it
you.
as a
I agree with you. But the interesting part of this for this conversation, and it impacts that, is like, medicine's not working if I'm making that decision. Like, authority is not working
right.
in medicine if I'm making that decision, right? So how do we grow into a world where it works, again, not just for me, the individual, but for us collectively as members of a democracy?
Yeah, I'm
You guys have to come up with the
punting,
answers,
but
by the
I
way.
will say that, certainly in our view, the structural authority is being chipped away at in healthcare because of things like that, because people are relying on other sources than traditional sources of authority and expertise in healthcare. Whether or not existing and sort of entrenched and incumbent sources of authority are going to relinquish their power, the power that has come with the authority that they've had, not for very long, to your point, maybe for 100 years. That, I think, is to be questioned, and how that happens is probably more for social scientists in the room that understand how we actually take away power that we have assigned through authority or conferred through authority and give it to new entrants or re-emerging entrants like networks of trusted peers who may have a better idea of how you personally should manage your health.
Fair enough.
I don't know that this fully answers the question because it's a big one, but I think there's a clue in research of a guy named Ron Engelhardt, who looks at kind of how values shift across societies over time. And he's been doing this study since 1960s or 70s across like 60 different countries, looking at how much authority in and of itself is a value popularly. And one of the things that he found is that there's this very predictable pattern, which is that the first generation that was raised without fear of physical deprivation, like they weren't going to be hungry some night, had these radically different values that geared much more towards self-expression and autonomy and away from authority. Which again, sort of if you accept that cognitive framework that authority, we mainly use it when we need to be safe. If we feel sort of at some level essentially safe, then maybe we shift our energy to other areas where we're gonna, find safety. I'm not saying that we actually are safe, and I think that sort of gets to some of the problem, which is, I think we live in a society where we're not very likely to die on the spot, and a doctor is going to come in and save us. So maybe we're less, we care less that the doctor, about what the doctor's saying and the doctor's role in society. And you could argue that that's happening across a whole bunch of different pillars where, it's not necessarily to say that it's a correct assessment, but just that the fear that drives some of the need for authority has dissipated. and we take for granted a bunch of things that are provided to us by that managerial layer, and the authority that lives in it, without really like buying into it. And so if you accept that, then we're in for kind of a reality check, which arguably is what we're seeing. And I would say in the media, we're definitely seeing, where we've sort of like, for a set of economic and structure of media reasons, we've happened to have a kind of media system that more or less combines some sort of buy-in to a process of journalism with distribution power.
Right.
And now those things are completely coming apart. And your journalistic competence has nothing to do with your ability to reach an audience.
Right.
That's not because people had maybe people never bought into that in the first place. Like maybe people never were willing to choose something that was well generated over something that was entertaining. Maybe we just had a system in the middle that sort of did that work for them, and now that system's going away. And so, to me, the question then becomes, well, how do you build structures that have that level of trust that work in a kind of networked environment? And I don't think that's an easy answer, but I think it probably exists in kind of bringing these relationships down. So I'll give like a kind of abstract political example, or I can give it later.
No, give it. Then I have a question.
I think it's really interesting. The conversation about, there's a lot of like sort of people looking at this idea of kind of proxy-based democratic process.
Right.
So this is an idea of like, instead of electing a representative, I'm going to give Gary my vote on AI because he seems smart about this stuff, and he's going to vote for a group of people on that.
Right.
That kind of system, because I have a trust bond with Gary, may be more resilient and more able to kind of confer trust on the ultimate decision that's made than one where I have a very kind of abstract relationship with a representative that I'm only really buying into because of their political party. And so I think if you could bring trust closer and find ways to aggregate it,
Localized trust.
or bring it down a level or two, so that it's not sort of somewhere up in a bureaucracy, but that that in one way or another I'm deliberately investing in my trust relationships on particular domains in a way that feels more valid. It's
Right.
Yeah, I could go on, but.
Even as we have this conversation, our technology is taking us to a place where we're less able to understand and unpack how we get to any decision. And AI is about to make that a lot more true. And that also shifts authority. It shifts, in particular, who has authority. And now there are all these sort of invisible places where there is authority that we're starting to talk about after the effect. We're talking about, well, the ethical implications of AI and how did that bot become a racist? Oh, it's because humans are racists and the people who created it actually, didn't think through it in the way that maybe we as a society want them to think through. And Gary, AI is your sweet spot. I would love to hear your thought on who holds authority that maybe we're not thinking about.
I mean, programmers hold the authority now. Programmers and the people who run the large corporations. So I was just thinking, prior to your question about the difference between Wikipedia, which I trust, and Facebook, which I don't. There have been empirical studies of Wikipedia, and it's pretty good. It's on a par with Encyclopedia Britannica, and I don't think there's anything better. And I think Facebook rather indulges my perception of myself as a know-it-all because it feeds to me pieces by other people who agree with me, which is probably not as reliable as Wikipedia. So somehow there are what AI people would call cost functions or optimization functions, things that are being optimized. And Wikipedia is doing its best. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I give them money every year. Wikipedia is doing its best to optimize truth. And I mean, it makes some errors along the way, and it sacrifices certain things. It doesn't do a good job of discussing complex issues.
Right.
But it does a pretty good job of alighting on truth. And Facebook chooses not to optimize that. Maybe there's some pressure on them now to do that, but what they've been trying to optimize is eyeballs, right? And so there are some programmers at Facebook who presumably help and accomplishing that mission, and Zuckerberg picks what the mission is. He could have a different mission, and I think you could read him as somewhat changing the mission in light of the recent election. But you ask, who has the authority? Well, it's the people who design these systems, and say, what is it that we are going to reward the system for doing? So especially if you're talking about a machine learning system, effectively you're rewarding it for doing something. Just like you could reward a rat or a pigeon in an experiment, you're rewarding your AI system for serving up a particular kind of answer that you want. And you can decide, I want to maximize eyeballs, I want to maximize truth, and there are different algorithms that you can write. Most of those algorithms for now are opaque. They're owned by the companies. They're not publicly available. Wikipedia actually says something about the algorithms that it uses, so those are relatively transparent. Facebook's algorithms are relatively not transparent. Google's algorithms are not transparent, and Google's an interesting case because there's a whole industry of people trying essentially to cheat the Google algorithms, right? That's what search engine optimization is ways of trying to get their stuff to I do SEO on your website. I'm trying to make your website more popular than it is, and that's like trying to reverse engineer the authority system that is built into Google. And so there's like an arms race around these optimization functions.
So Wikipedia, let's talk about Wikipedia a second because you brought it up. It's fairly good. It's not spot on. It's
not perfect.
It's more consistent at some things than others. It is reviled by the far right who feel abandoned by it. It is, and yet there are AI systems that use Wikipedia as their base source for knowledge. Like I was just at Microsoft looking at some things that they're doing with Cortana and the very cool things that they're allowing teachers to do in their classrooms with students being able to build PowerPoints that pull knowledge, and they only pull from Wikipedia. And that caught my attention because I was like, but wait a minute, a student coming into a classroom, and this isn't to pick on Microsoft, by the way, it's to make the example. A student coming into the classroom is going to use this tool to get to knowledge, is not going to have the context or understanding that I have for what Wikipedia is. And as good as it is it fair to call it the source of all knowledge?
No, certainly not. And I mean, I can run down some ways in which it's quite weak. Like I actually looked at my own Wikipedia entry the other day, and this is something I should have done for the last few years.
I did it this morning too, by the way.
And it's wildly out of date. So I just launched a business, sold the business. That's not mentioned there. Like it was a 3-year effort, and it received significant media coverage, but nobody bothered, and I didn't bother yet. And maybe I will eventually. But so it's very out of date. And as I said, it's not very good on disagreements. Where there are disputes, they get labeled, but it doesn't give you much more than that. So there are all kinds of problems with their model. I was just comparing it, relatively speaking, to Facebook. I would probably actually give a little bit more trust to a Wikipedia entry. I would not, by any means, want to give any single source of information unique authority. I don't think that would be a safe bet. And like it's one source among many. One of the things we need, again, I mentioned education, and to unpin it off the board, I think it's incredibly important. So we have an opportunity here right now in society to move to a much more data-driven regime, which is great. I mean, I think, let's not just put in the taller person as president. Like, that's not a good idea. We can move on. We are in this kind of, driven by data society. But, there's an old book called something like Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. And now we're living in an era where people lie through statistics more than ever before. And it's easier to lie through statistics more than ever before. The only remedy for that is to have educated consumers who understand, consumers of quantitative results, and understand all the different cheats you can do. Like my favorite cheat that I learned about in graduate school that I always call people on if they do it is you run your axis not from 0 to 100, your y-axis not from 0 to 100, but from like 50 to 100. So I often give a talk about big data and Google Translate. And the first paper on Google Translate said, look, the more data we get, the better. And the graph ran from like 47 to 52. And as they got 6 billion words, they went from 47 to 52%. And then I replot it from 0 to 100, and you're like, well, okay, more data helps a little, but it's basically a flat line here. Well, you need to have those kind of mental facilities in your head in order to be a good user of big data. So it's great that we have that data and that we have a society that's attuned to it, but unless we educate people in how you think about data in the same way we need to educate them about critical reasoning in general, it's still not a cure. Having the data, themselves, even if they're always available, is not necessarily a good thing. You can go correlation hunting for anything that you want.
So I understand that, and I think that we are, I see that the fact of the matter is that AI is sort of taking the thought process out of a lot of what we do, so that we don't necessarily even know to have the conversation with ourselves about any given process, whether it's the news that we're reading, whether it is the healthcare that we're receiving. And yet the inputs going into AI aren't without bias. They're controlled by a fairly narrow group of people who are the new authority, but not necessarily named so, or just beginning to name so. So, where can we improve? Like, how do we even begin to have a broader conversation about that, and to help a sort of functioning democracy embrace AI without being played by it?
I think the first thing is people have to realize that the illusion of transparency doesn't mean that something's actually transparent. So your Facebook feed is user-friendly. Stories just pop up, you like them, you feel like this is all to the good, but that doesn't mean that the system behind the curtain is doing what you want it to do, or that you have any control over it. And I think it's just very easy to take pre-digested morsels and assume that they're what you want them to be. I mean, this is true for classical media too, right? I mean, some editor decides what's important for you. We should be moving towards a world where individuals have tools to adjust some of this for themselves. So what mix of news would I like that agrees with me, and how much do I want to see what the other side actually says? And you should be able to have agents that decide that for you. And for various commercial reasons, nobody's done it, but you could do it now. I think a second thing is people do have to realize that no system is without bias. There's this book, Cathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math's Destruction, which is about some of the ways that biases can find their way into AI systems. In fact, there's no way to build an AI system that is without bias. There's something called the no free lunch theorem that says that any system has some bias of some sort or another. So we have to be educated consumers. We can't expect that by magic, just because a machine does the computation for us, that it solved the problem.
So I'm just giving the audience a heads up. We're going to ask for questions in 1 minute, but you each have something to say on that, right?
Well, I was actually going to ask a question too, if that's all right,
Please.
around algorithmic disclosure in the future. That do you envision, either of you, and Jesse, I think you should weigh in too. We'll switch roles. A future in which organizations have to disclose. I think Amazon said something like 70 million machine learned nudges last year or next year or something. Is there ever a future where organizations have to disclose what is feeding their
There is certainly talk
system?
about this. So there's a right to explanation that's been discussed in Europe, and I won't be surprised if that happens here, and I think it's a good thing. There's a kind of countervailing trend, which is that the AI technique that's most popular right now, called deep learning, is not very transparent.
They wouldn't know
I think
what to say.
there will be social pressure over time, and you can already see the beginnings of it, to move towards algorithms that are more transparent, and I think that that's a good thing. I hope we will have algorithms that are more transparent, and that people will push for that. I mean, just imagine when we have driverless cars as a matter of routine.
Right.
You know, if your spouse is killed in an accident and what you get back is a vector of 3 billion numbers, and you're like, this is why I had the accident. It's not really very satisfying.
Right.
That's terrifying, Gary. Eli.
It's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I think to the question of like, I mean, listening to you, I sort of realized like, you know, there's an idea from Marx of the commoditization of the fetishization of the commodity, and I feel like partly what we're talking about is like the same thing with facts or with information. We have this little fact or idea, but it's totally separated from the history of it, and where it comes from is erased, and that's a bad way to deal with knowledge, and a very dangerous way to deal with knowledge. And it's exactly what you're describing when you're talking about pulling an arbitrary fact without its history attached.
Right.
And so I think that question of context and how do you build context for people so that they understand, like, how did this get to me? By what process did it get to me?
Right.
That becomes very important. I think the second piece is, I think part of the argument I'm making, and this is not coincidental with running a media company that I run, Upworthy, is I think that the kind of emotional and story component of how we build authority and trust and buy into some of these systems is really important. And that the conversation of are we going to kind of be rational and fact-based, or are we going to be emotional and story-based? Like, that can't be the conversation, or the rational fact-based side will lose, and I very much don't want that to happen. So how do we make the arguments for buy-in to these systems of authority and expertise in a way that resonates emotionally and that resounds with the way that people actually build trust and understand the world? And how do we tell those stories that give people the context and the emotional buy-in to those systems? Because we can't rely on that managerial layer to save us. We've got to actually like build those cognitive structures anew.
To integrate those things.
Yeah.
Let's get a question or two from the audience. We're going to go there.
I like the confidence idea.
Authority and trust, and a couple of times, Eli, you've talked about management and leadership. So a lot of times we think about leadership having authority or being, viewed at with trust or distrust. So in this new world, how do we define leadership? A couple of times you said the management layer, we have to find our own. So do we actually have to redefine what leadership is in a world where authority
leadership.
and trust and are kind of migrating?
You'll notice no one's talking. They're just deep in thought.
Well, I'm trying to figure out where. So I will tell you publicly, my prediction is that in the next 2 to 3 months, we will have a new president. I could be off by a factor of 4, but I doubt it. And that's going to have interesting repercussion for society, right? So we will presumably have somebody from the same party, but we will have what I think is going to look in retrospect like a travesty, and people will do a lot of hand-wringing about how this happened and what could they have done. So I think it's an interesting moment to be thinking about authority in the leadership sense. I mean, I think something went wrong last time, and I think a lot of things responsible for it. One of which I think we were talking about now, which is the way in which media was distributed and consumed, and how authority worked there.
I mean, my 2 cents would be that sometimes we're too fast to assume that access, whether it's access to information or maybe even access to media channels or whatever the case, equates power and, then gives you some right to command. And I'm not sure that we're there yet. Right now, I think you see a lot of, like, the access has sort of agitated the structures, but I think there's still a fair amount of authority that's still in structural positions. And, certainly women and people who have less privilege, I think, would be the first to say that there's still quite a bit of structural authority in our society. And while the access has maybe democratized, we've got a ways to go before we're really going to see authority rewritten writ large.
Okay, I'm going to skip over you for this one and go to one final audience question. Make it quick if you can.
So there's obviously a great deal of fragmentation, which we've talked about throughout the day. But one of the reactions to that, like from a Tavistock perspective, would be this notion of oneness that comes out, so that the leadership characteristics are part of a dynamic related to that fragmentation. It doesn't mean that they necessarily go away. I think it's
so
more.
Let's get to the question quick because we're running out of time.
So I'm just curious, especially for Gary, what's your perspective about the dynamics as we move through this cycle? Because this is the requirements for oneness in this group that we call the United States are not going to fade away. They're actually going to stay with the dynamics of the society through that fragmentation. So I'm curious to hear where you think the dynamics are going. Will we have greater dependence on authority structures, or will the fragmentation contribute to a more of fight or flight capabilities, which are all kind of classic Tavistock structures?
I think we're moving, unless something changes, we're moving to a more and more fragmented world where each person can get an individual mirror of their own beliefs and feel reinforced that they're correct. And I think we're moving away from the kinds of pressures that would make people do things in collective ways. So we don't even have like television shows that everybody watches anymore. We're very much in this long tail era where you can find things that reinforce what you believe, what you like, and so forth. And Facebook is very big, distributor of news right now. They might make a decision to change, but the way they have it set up is, Facebook has figured out that I don't like Trump, and it feeds me a lot of negative Trump stories. And maybe that turns out to be right, and maybe it's at least possible that turns out to be wrong, and I wouldn't know it. And so each person can go down their own little rabbit hole the way that things are structured. And I shouldn't pick so much on Facebook. I mean, this is true too of like cable news where you have, you know, a channel for you and a channel for you and so forth, and we get shunted off in our own directions.
So we've spent not nearly enough time examining this big idea of authority, and we leave with one solid prediction for next year, and that is from Gary, and that is that by the time you all get here next year, we will have a new president. Time will only tell if that is true. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jesse.
Eli. So interesting that did Eli even flog his book at all in that entire session?
I didn't.
Did it even get mentioned that Eli wrote the book called The Filter Bubble, which he's so modest, you know? But that sort of defined that phrase that has become a meme, a major explanatory tool for the world we're in. Anyway, Tracy Young, who's coming up next, was a construction engineer who got frustrated with the way construction works, so she decided to create software to make construction easier for everybody who worked in it. So she's going to talk about it, and then I'm going to join her on stage and talk to her a little bit.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Oh, thank you. I think that was for you, not me, but thank you. My name is Tracy Young. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of PlanGrid. PlanGrid builds beautiful, simple, effective software for the construction industry. So I want to talk to you today about the problems of construction. This is the status quo of all construction information on almost every project in the world, which is there's a lot of paper. And actually, let's see if I'm actually going to come down and point at it. So this right here are reams and reams of paper. They're 46 inches by 36 inches, so they're kind of bigger than me. And this is $100,000 worth of paper, which is totally insane. This is more than a Tesla Model X. Over here is how the industry teaches new engineers how to version control drawing sheets. Drawings are constantly changing, and industry standard is just putting the new one on top of the old one and then dog-earing it. I can tell you firsthand, this doesn't work. Someone's gonna flip this set, and then they just kind of undog-ear themselves. Right here is a project, they came up with this really clever coloring scheme, and they basically decided that, you know, we've got a really hard way, we just can't figure out what's current, so I know I'll spend 5 times as much printing in color so that I know that the pink set is more current than the yellow set, which is more current than the green set. And so if you look closely at that photo, there's green on top of yellow, on top of blue, and there's actually really organized toe tags on each set, and they actually had to give up all of that for PlanGrid because it just wasn't working. So lots of paper. But really what every construction professional inevitably faces is something like this. Number 1, denial. How could we have possibly missed this? How could we have not included this in our budget? How did we not realize that we can't actually build this when we were going through the drawing set? Second stage is blame. Well, if the architect designed it correctly in the first place, I would have bid it correctly and wrote the right contracts for this project, and now we wouldn't have seen months and months of delay. It's their fault, not mine. And then sadness, because someone has to go over to the building owner, the developer, and say, we can't build this as is, I need more money. I need more money, I need more time to make this work. And so the problems of construction is that there's tons of change orders, cost is increasing all the time, schedules delaying, disputes, finger pointing, everyone is just generally angry on job sites, which is why there's lots of problems. And just in my hometown in San Francisco, where our office is headquartered in, I mean, the dollar amount, it translates to Bay Bridge 240% over its initial budget. Well, let's not even talk about time. Caltrans on average, every highway project, every roadway project, 22% over its initial budget. Santa Clara Medical Center isn't gonna see its patients for another 2 years. It's currently 125% over its initial budget. Current estimates is 400% over what was initially estimated. Unbelievable. And so here we are with all these problems, and investment in construction is growing fast. Construction is currently an $8 trillion a year. industry globally. McKinsey is estimating that by 2030, we're going to be spending closer to $13 trillion. And actually, to keep up with our growing GDP, to keep up with population growth and our deteriorating infrastructure, we need to actually be investing closer to $57 trillion per year to keep up with the world. But as these projects get delivered and these projects get written up and permitted, and they're much larger projects going up, especially in this city. We call them mega projects, billion-dollar-plus projects. Even though they only account for 1 out of 10 projects, they're 77% by project value, which totally makes sense because it's such high dollar amounts. So let's play a quick game. Projects with overruns. You're going to have to help me guess. This is percent of mega projects that see overruns. 100%. 98%, close. Average schedule delay. This is in terms of months from what was initially estimated. 24 months is really good. 20 months. Average cost increase. This is percent over its initial budget. 35, 50, 60, 100%, 80%. So I don't know if there's any developers or building owners in here, but you guys would know this well. So when we really dive in deep and look at construction labor productivity, which is where most of the cost comes from, labor and materials, what you'll find is that when we compare the construction industry across all other industry segments, in green here is all non-farm industries. By and large, everyone has figured out how to be more productive than we were 60 years ago. And so on the bottom with the yellow and orange and purple lines, given that construction is heavily driven by commodities, so they've adjusted it by different price deflators. Any way you cut it, construction has seen a steady decline in labor productivity, which means we are less productive today in construction than we were 60 years ago. As a construction engineer coming out of university in 2008, I saw this graph and thought, WTF, how could this be possible? How could it be that we're constructing these amazing skyscrapers in some of the most extreme conditions, and we're figuring out how to go home safely to our families every day, but we haven't figured out how to be more efficient than we were 20 years ago, 60 years ago? And so how did the rest of the world become more productive? And what we'll find is that there's this massive correlation between an industry's ability to digitize their workflows and their information and the increase in productivity. Except in construction, where you can't take the IBM personal computer out to the field in the 80s while everyone is adopting it to do their jobs better. And so we're not last. We're above agriculture and hunting. We're down at the bottom, not the last one. But compared to our counterparts in the automotive and aerospace sectors that spend 3.5 to 4.5% of revenues on software to do their jobs better and to deliver their products faster, construction spends less than 1% of revenues today. And so we've just historically underinvested in technology and software to gain that efficiency that everyone else in the world has seen. But that's obviously changing. And so this is what we're trying to do. We're solving such a simple problem. The founders of PlanGrid were just at the right place at the right time. Steve Jobs announces the first generation iPad. The whole world doesn't really know what to think about it. You guys saw the photos on the internet with people like putting iPads through their faces and talking to like a giant iPhone and making fun of it, making fun of the word iPad. But my co-founders and I looked at each other and we're like, wow, this looks like a fully powered computer that we could take out to the job site. And we thought, let's build software for it. And so here we are today. Over 500,000 construction projects have been built with PlanGrid over the last 6 years. And we're very lucky to be able to do what we do. Construction is the infrastructure of the world. And there's certainly lots of challenges that we need to overcome. There's lots of problems in the world right now. For us, the problem that we've decided to solve is if we are unable to figure out how to make this industry more productive now, we will be unable to deliver the infrastructure that this world needs. This is all the problems that we currently have set aside. And it's gonna impact, we're seeing it in New York already, we're seeing it in San Francisco. If we are unable to build faster and make construction more cheap, it hurts people at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it's not hurting the people in this room, it's hurting the rest of the people, right? Anyways, my time is out, so I'm going to stop talking. If you would like to geek out about construction or mobile technology, my email is tracy@plangrid.com. Or if you're building anything at all, we can help save you boatloads of money, so come talk to us. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you one thing, because you obviously have sort of a macroeconomic view of this, the way you contextualized it. I'm just curious, given that you've done all this in construction, where else do you think stuff like an approach like this is needed? What other industries do you see that have a similar challenge that is unaddressed?
Apparently agriculture and hunting.
Yeah. Hunting, I don't see it, but agriculture, actually, there's a lot going on.
But as software developers, what we like to do is look at what people are doing and where is the manual work. Like, technology can eliminate that manual work so that people can focus on what they're actually supposed to do. For us, they're supposed to be building.
Yeah. Well, it is true that if you go to the problem that we talked to Fred about at the very beginning of the day, about bringing the rest of the world into this economy that we're so, lucky to be part of, we're going to have to build a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So I hope you're successful and you help us do that.
We're doing what we know. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really good. You can hold on to that. I don't need that. So Michael Wolff is going to moderate the next session and talk about what's happening again with news and media and the press, what it means today. And you'll see a familiar face who was just on stage, Jessie Hempel. She's so good, we couldn't let her go too far. Michael, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Jessie, good to have you back. Kevin,
David, good to see you.
Nice to have you. And we have a special guest add-on, Charles Ferguson, we're very pleased about.
David, this says we have 55 seconds left, so I hope that
It's going to be a very short conversation.
exactly. So David asked us to talk about the state of discord between America and the media. And when people think about the new challenges for media, they always come back to the Trump White House. But there's really a lot more going on, and that's what I'd like to talk about with our panel. What's really going on is there's a total unbridled contempt for the media from a large segments of America. And make no mistake about it, the news business is booming. Their website traffic is way up, TV ratings are doing well, newspapers that everybody thought were wheezing before are now adding digital subscribers and paper subscribers. The Washington Post is adding paper subscribers. But what we want to do is look at what can we do to confront this contempt? What's technology's role in dealing with it? So I'd like to introduce my panel to, directly to my left is Jessie Hempel, who you just met. I don't know how much people talked about it, but Jessie is, as an editor at both Wired and Fortune, she wrote cover stories that were about some of the people that are the most important in influencing today's news environment, which is companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter and others. Kevin Delaney is managing editor and co-founder of Quartz, which if you're not a regular reader, you must be, because it's some of the smartest analysis out there. And Charles Ferguson is one of the great documentary filmmakers of our time. He was the director and producer of No End in Sight, which is about the American occupation of Iraq. Amazing film. It was nominated for an Academy Award. And he won the Academy Award for the film Inside Job. And he can talk about it. He's now doing a film about the Nixon era, which is mildly relevant for today. Let me start off with a couple of questions for our panel. Kevin, I want to start with you, which is that you could argue today that people are going to online news for different reasons than they did in the past. In the past, it was about being informed. Today, it's really about being outraged and being opposed.
Yeah.
what are your users' expectations for what they're going to get when they go to courts?
Yeah, I think it's a good point about outrage, and I think it is a journalistic and a business model decision to pander to outrage, and you don't have to do that. And so the promise that what we offer our users is to help them be up to date and smart on the global economy, basically with the real global view. And so in the wake of the Brexit and the U.S. presidential election, it's taken some like adjustment by newsrooms like our own to sort of figure out how we actually deliver on that. And so your instinct as a journalist is when the president tweets something or when the Brexit camp says something outrageous about something, that's news, and then you follow up on it. But the reality of the last year has been, if you were to do only that, it would consume you. And actually, it's sort of a zero sum. You can either like report on fact check every single tweet and other sort of development in the political story, or you can watch those, but try and serve your reader with analysis and information that actually helps them figure out what's in their best interest and where things are heading. And what we didn't realize at the beginning of this was that those two, in this moment in history, are more in tension and more in conflict than we're used to them being, partly just because of the volume of the fact-checking and tweet watching that you could be doing.
So are you being held to a higher standard, and your readers always expect that you're going to do well-researched factual journalism? Are you being held to a higher standard?
Yeah, I think the place that we're trying to find, which is what a lot of news organizations are, is that the news developments, and Quartz covers politics as one part of the thing, but actually it's a relatively small part of we have 130 full-time journalists around the world, and a bunch in India and Africa and Hong Kong. And so the coverage of the White House is actually limited to a very small subset of, and coverage of the Brexit and the UK situation is a small subset of our overall staff. But the news is like kind of unrelenting and really kind of big and feels cosmic. And so what you're being held to is delivering analysis, but probably at a pace that's much more accelerated from what it has been. And what that means is that you need to have journalists who have a certain amount of expertise in what they're writing about, so they can actually say smart things with a time frame that is compressed. Because if you wait a week to write that article about something like North Korea or the situation in North Korea, like the facts have changed a lot over that time.
And people aren't waiting for the research?
I think they are. I mean, we're finding an audience for people reading these things, but I guess our own expectation is like we're not going to sit around and take our time and sort of create amazing artisanal sentences. Whereas there's greater we love artisanal sentences, for the record.
I love artisanal sentences.
But there is greater urgency just because of the sort of magnitude of what it feels like we're going through.
So Jesse, as editor of Back Channel, which by the way, many people don't know, is part of Condé Nast now, you're covering a lot of what's happening, not just in the technology business today, but what its impacts are more broadly. There is a belief that there's a large segment of the population that's been left behind by technology, and that's one of the things that we're seeing today in terms of the credibility, not just of news, but of other forms of media and technology. What do you think about the set of people? Are we really seeing people that are left behind by technology?
There's no question that we are seeing people left behind by technology, and so Back Channel is a small magazine that was started atop Medium, and then Condé Nast bought it last year and put it under the Wired Media Group. So on our good days, we like to call ourselves Wired's R&D outfit for the future of long-form digital journalism. And we're thinking a lot about how to tell technology stories for audiences of people that we have largely ignored in the past. And as I listen to you, Kevin, it strikes me that like one of our challenges. You nailed it when you said like outrage and disgust. It's a business model problem. It is an editorial decision-making problem. But then you have to come up with the new business models, and you have to come up with the backbone to make the editorial decisions to do something else. And that is what we are trying to do at Back Channel. And so we are trying to think less about page views and more about reach and more about cementing our relationship with our audience and engendering trust from our audience to tell those longer stories. And Kevin, I'd be so interested in what your experience is. Post-election, it is tricky to be true to a technology beat when the entire world wants to read about Trump's tweet. You see your audience, even for your best work, just go like that and stay depressed for a long period of time. And how then you figure out how to monetize your product we are an experiment at Condé Nast. We can tell you nothing for certain. I can only tell you sort of what we're playing with. And I can speak more to that if you're curious. But one thing we're trying to do is keep costs way down, double down on quality, double down on the relationship between the individual writer and the audience, on the bet that an individual writer with an audience of 100 people who look for that writer and read everything that writer works, maybe not 100, that's not quite scalable, but small audience, accruing a number of those is more useful than providing something where the relationship between the writer and the audience member isn't as distinguishable. And then we're also looking for different ways to make money than simply ad-based page views. So we're doing a lot of events and sponsorships and speaking, and we're finding right now that we can make our costs and put out great quality journalism to an audience of dedicated enthusiasts without having to rely on page views.
So the business model of news is safe. Let's talk about filmmaking, though. Charles, one of the common themes throughout your films has been the idea that you're able to take apart something that impacts the world and tell sort of the story behind the story. Then you create a narrative around what's really happened. What is really happening today? Do you feel that you're going to be in a position to provide a narrative around today, or is it going to be referred from other periods that you're looking at?
Well, that's a nice small question. I think we are living in an extremely complicated, confusing, paradoxical, unstable time. And what I see in the work that I'm trying to do three things now. I'm making a 4.5-hour long film about the Nixon era, particularly, though not exclusively, Watergate. I had that idea, by the way, before Mr. Trump was a gleam in anybody's eye, so I can't claim that I was prescient. I was just lucky in that case. But it is, of course, utterly extraordinary to go through that material now. It's amazing. Second thing that I'm doing is getting ready to do something on Mr. Trump. And the third is I'm involved in a startup in exactly this area. So we're going to try and do very serious stuff, including documentary filmmaking, as a viable for-profit startup, OTT video thing. And so the OTT video world and its relationship to documentary film is over the top, internet only. No reliance on the incumbent legacy cable system, broadcast system, et cetera. And confronting this universe, there was just, I think, an article by Susan Crawford in Back Channel. Okay, Susan Crawford, who I know, makes the absolutely correct point that we are now in a dangerous universe where a dangerously small number of people control internet access in the United States. And and they are moving into content as well. And so you see very scary things about the level of industrial concentration and the nature of the ownership of those industries and their relationship to political power. And at the same time, we see enormous opportunity, just huge opportunity. There are, very simplistically speaking, there are two remaining reasons why people haven't yet cut the cord. One of them is sports, and the other is news. So if you can provide people with a very high quality source of news, then potentially you have a vast audience. And will those people watch documentary films? Well, we'll see.
Yeah, but in Inside Job, for example, you took something that was extremely complex,
Yep.
and you made it understandable.
Yep.
And all the three of the people who are sitting here on the stage deal with rather sophisticated audiences. You deal with people who are readers, people who are intelligent and recognize themselves as being sophisticated. Do you feel that media is ignoring a broader public that today are getting their news not just from online, but are getting it in different places, different outlets?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So, I mean, if we look at today, the people who are reading and watching your films, they're not the same people who are the majority of America. I mean, are we really serving through news what some people might call the real America? And I'll get to the next America in a second, but
Given how fragmented the media system is, can any outlet or any group of people really serve all America?
Well, yeah, I mean, this brings us to the point about a filter bubble, which is Eli just left, but the idea of are we just creating news and information for the people who want to hear it? In other words, are we giving them precisely what they want to hear? And is that because we're dealing with a sophisticated audience?
If I can make a point there, I think that the filter bubble phenomenon has been in some ways overstated. On the one hand, it is true in the obvious ways, obviously. On the other hand, if you look even just 6 inches below the surface, you see an enormously high level of industrial concentration in the media system. And if you aggregate, how many minutes per person on average, et cetera, actually ownership and control and distribution are all enormously concentrated in the United States. Sinclair just purchased, Tribune, and with that, they have access to 75% of the homes in the United States, I think. And if you add up Sinclair and Fox, then you get a very significant fraction of the United States that doesn't have a 4-year college degree. And so, I think you have to be cautious about the filter bubble phenomenon.
Yeah, but when my team at Activate calls the people who control access, calls them the discovery oligopoly, because one way or the other, news gets filtered through Facebook, Google, Twitter, and a couple of other places. Are you concerned about your news, your information, how people are discovering it?
I think it's a really good question. And one of the reasons, like a filter bubble, the idea is that you see, because Facebook in particular, you search out information that confirms your worldview, I think is how I would describe it. The thing that's super, super, super challenging is that we are biologically wired to like things that confirm our worldview. There are experts at Oxford and elsewhere who have done studies, and seeing something, reading something that actually confirms how you feel about the world, it activates similar activities in your brain to when you eat a Snickers bar that has lots of sugar in it, or something like that. And so the fact is, like, we're just drawn. We like that. And the fact is that Facebook is an incredible platform for optimizing to human things we don't even know about ourselves, like to human behavior. Human clicks, I guess, is concretely kind of what it's about. And so they, Mark Zuckerberg, as of this fall, was saying, like, it's absurd that Facebook in any way influence the election. We're just like showing people what they want to see, and that's precise, like a very precise articulation of what's going on. I think that we can't change Facebook, but we can endeavor to write analysis that is, and reporting and do real journalism that actually transcends filter bubbles. I think that's an ongoing project and is admittedly an idealistic one. I read about in the 1930s about the approach to sort of a similar political extremism, basically, and some of the sort of radical populism. And there are groups of earnest academics who started creating these museums about humanity, basically. And you see these, like the Museum of Man in Paris and these other cities. And they date from that era because they felt like the only way to transcend the filter bubbles of the time was to evoke in individuals a recognition that we have a shared humanity that transcends our religion, our political party, these other attributes about ourselves. I think that would be a really interesting project right now. What's the equivalent? And it may be documentary films have and photographs and visual media actually have the potential to elicit responses around a shared humanity that, quite possibly articles on Quartz and Back Channel have a harder time actually accessing. So I don't know. I just told you that I don't know the answer to your question, but I think it's a vital one, and maybe we should look at history even for more creative ways to think about it.
Jesse, but you look at the world of the people who are in fact providing the filter and serving up.
That would be the tech titans.
Exactly.
Valley, right? It's actually I think at Techonomy that Mark Zuckerberg spoke maybe a little bit too quickly after the election, and he's took back some of what he said about how we're just the platform, and that too often is paired with, from my perspective, a lack of responsibility about how that platform is used in a democracy. And truthfully, it becomes dangerous when we expect any of those filters, when we ask any of those filters to lean too heavily on editorial tools to shape the stories. We actually, I don't believe that we want that either.
Do we want them focused on AI? I mean, do they want them to use some algorithm to surface?
If it is possible to use AI to optimize for news that is true when there is a binary truth, I would counter that we want that. But I mean, that is coming regardless. But in some ways, the distrust. We are a symptom of that distrust. We are maybe the product of that distrust. But I do think that it's wrong to say that the media is the source of the distrust, or that something we could do necessarily would erase the contempt. Would you say that that is fair?
It just makes me think about a lot of you probably saw the White House correspondent dinner. Hassan Minhaj did this great monologue, and part of it he said is, "You, the media, you're a minority. Get used to it. Like you're the one of you is going to do something wrong, and you're all going to be blamed for it, just like minorities are." And so, I think there's a higher awareness that we can't make sloppy mistakes, and that we need to be in our best behavior and be as serious or more serious than ever in the civic journalistic project, which, as you should have raised before, Michael, is at odds with the commercial survival at moments of the media industry.
Well, can we ever go back? I mean, are we going to be in a world where everything has to be sensationalized, so everything has to be reality TV? So we're really not. It's not the serious New York Times. It's American Idol or The Bachelor. Are those the analogies for where we expect news media to go and how we get past this sort of conflict with most people in the news media?
I think it's wearying to be told how you should feel, and that's effectively what these commercial and journalistic models are. This is outrageous, you should feel outraged, this is all about outrage. But when you do that, like hour after hour and day after day and week after week, my own guess is that that's unsustainable and that the consumers are either going to shut you off or they're going to look for something else.
Charles, does it have to be entertaining for people to be interested?
Well, yes, and I don't think that making things entertaining is necessarily bad. I like good cinematography. I like that some of my stuff looks cool. I like catching bad guys with their pants down every now and then. It's fun, I have to say. But it is also important that things be correct, of course, but it might even be more important than that they're correct, is that they are insightful. And I mean, to take the subjects of my first two films, if you look at the supposedly best of conventional media coverage of the occupation of Iraq, if you look at what the Washington Post and the New York Times and, collect the usual suspects, if you look at what they wrote between 2004 and 2006, say, or 2003 and 2006, you're not impressed. You're really not impressed. This would be an understatement. And we're not talking about small things. We're talking about dissolving the Iraqi army. We're talking about Paul Bremer flying $12 billion in $100 bills and distributing bricks of $100 bills to privates who would go out and do random stuff. Almost $1 billion of which was stolen by one person, the first defense minister of Iraq. And then we get to the financial crisis. And the New York Times still has not totally learned its lesson in this regard. There was just an op-ed. God, what was his name? He's a professor of law at Harvard. And he published an op-ed in the Times like a week ago. And it was about how you needed to deregulate small banks in order to get more economic growth. I know this guy, and he has taken money from just about every financial services organization on the planet. A fact not mentioned. And when you see that kind of thing still happens on a very regular basis. Now, that's not to say that these publications don't do good stuff. They do great stuff. I love the New York Times. There's lots of very good journalism in it. There's lots of very good journalists who work for it. But you would think that with something like the financial crisis, with something like the occupation of Iraq, that at some point they would say, hey, you 20 people, go figure this out. And they don't do that.
Do people want to believe fake news? So we keep talking about the fake news. It's not clear. It's everything from the Pope endorses Trump. Kevin and I were just looking, CNN carries an article that there was fake news that Orrin Hatch was going to become the next president. It took us a while to figure. I'm still not sure. We think we have to reread that one.
Yeah.
But the question comes down to, do people know it's fake, and do they want it to be true so that they're willing to believe it?
I think you're giving people too much credit for thinking about that question at all. They just absorb ambiently and keep going, and that's even more challenging when it comes to fake news. It's not the stuff that you and Kevin read and take a moment and pause and say, is that true or not? I mean, that is like such a win that you ask that question. It's more the stuff that just sort of flies at you and surrounds you that you don't question. And I would say that people don't want it any more than they want the Snickers bar. But the fact is that biologically we're conditioned to allow for it, make room for it, and seek it. And so then the challenge becomes that we have to collectively, as some sort of an authoritative whole, take a step back and say, are we going to stand for it? And if not, how are we going to attempt to build the tools that will allow for something else to emerge? And I would totally agree with Kevin that people are going to get bored with the reality TV, the sort of the kind of media that we have now. And I am optimistic in thinking that it will change to become entertaining in different ways. But I don't necessarily believe those ways will be better unless we're thinking about these larger questions in tandem with the development.
We're running out of time. I'd just like to ask each of my panelists to give us, is there something that we should take away, something we should be thinking about over the next weeks and months as we look at what the media in the context of technology are doing? Charles, let's start with you, please.
I think it's very possible that one of the most dangerous things about the Trump administration is what it's likely to do to antitrust policy and telecommunications regulation. And not that it begins with them. They are the continuation of something that started 20 years ago, at least. But I do think that we're in a dangerous place with regard to those questions.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think that you're asking the right questions, and it's hard to, if you take away anything, it's that media as we know it, is in many ways a product of 20th century manufacturing practices around newspapers. So articles are a certain length because that's how you laid out the newspapers, and television shows and films are certain lengths. All of this is constrained by technologies that are actually not the constraining technologies of our moment in history. And what's kind of strange, and I live this because I worked at the Wall Street Journal for a long time, a place that when I was there was still defined by manufacturing technology that was no longer relevant. And so we're going to take a few questions. And thank you. And so I think we're at an interesting moment where we assume that the media is a 700-word article and a 24-minute television show and these sorts of things. There's really not a lot of reason that those formats exist and that they're produced in the same way that they were produced in 1909, which is still the case in many ways. And so it's a sort of part of my answer to all these questions is let's just make them, let's sort of move beyond the constraints to actually figure out how to serve readers better, and hopefully we'll find our way out by doing that.
And I would add succinctly that if you are a reader and you have found a source that is giving you accurate news that you need, pay for it. Pay up, even if they're not asking you. Because I think that we need to make that a cultural expectation around information we trust.
So I always do what David tells me to do, and he basically said we have to take some questions. So yes, please.
Hi, Dimitri Kofinas. I'm sorry if I missed this because I came in late. My question is for Kevin because, in general, I feel like one of the great challenges for good content is the advertising model. Yeah. But you guys are unique. You actually do exceptionally good content. And so I'd rather ask a question about the future of editorial and the future of educational technologies, data visualization, because you guys also do a great job with some of that stuff. So I'm curious what you see the future of news being in terms of the content and how to innovate in terms of pulling together all the different modes of informational experience for the process of education, sort of educating the public.
I think, thank you for that question. So I think that one thing that's sort of very trite to say is that the experience, whether it's called media or not, the experience of the majority of people around the world of media is on their phones. And I think that the ways in which we're serving them content on their phones is still actually pretty traditional. A lot of it is the 700-word articles that were defined based on newspaper printing and distribution technology. And so I think, to answer your question, I think there are places to look. I think China is actually a really interesting market to look with WeChat and Weixin, and there's a much more sort of dynamic market where actually consumers are amazingly paying. China's known as like the place where intellectual property goes to get ripped off. And the fact is that, as I understand it, as experts on this tell me, like there is actually a very thriving content ecosystem. Like content producers are actually succeeding in charging, partly because it's on mobile and because the micropayment infrastructure is actually so good and frictionless. And so I think the answer at a high level to your question is that education and information needs to be rethought and reinvented in the context of mobile devices. Like, and sure, we all say mobile, social, whatever, but the fact is we haven't actually delivered on that anywhere near the potential of that. And the second thing is that we should be a little bit more humble and look at places like China to understand alternative interactions and actually business models that are working there.
There's another question here.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Andrea Glorioso from the European Union delegation. This was an extremely rich panel, and it's possible that I missed this in the overload of information that you shared, so apologies in advance in that case. The debate on fake news is, of course, very present in Europe as well. By the way, we are accustomed to information operation or propaganda from both the Eastern and the Western Bloc for many decades. What's supposed to be happening here in this country is not a surprise to us. But around 50% of Italians are functionally illiterate. It means that they can read, but they cannot actually understand what they're reading. They cannot parse what they're reading. Don't you think that as an industry, the media industry has an interest to push for much more investments into media literacy education at a very early age? Because by the time you're 18, the way in which you process the world around you, the way in which you ask yourself, am I actually believing this? What are the bases on which I am to believe this or not is already set. You need to intervene much earlier. I don't see a lot of the debate here in the US, to be very honest. So I was curious to know what were your thoughts about that?
If that didn't come up, it might be because I take it as a given that, of course, and desperately, we need to be teaching our youngest people better skills around how to decode what they're seeing. And I think that AI is going to make that even more prevalent. I referenced this in my last conversation, but I was just at Microsoft. They had their Build conference, and one of the things that I thought was really cool was they had this PowerPoint presentation, and they'd infused AI so that a student putting together a PowerPoint could, just type in, like, I'm interested in hawks, and up would come information about hawks. And you then, therefore, from third grade, begin thinking that the information about hawks comes from Microsoft, PowerPoint. And actually it comes from Wikipedia behind that. But do you even know what Wikipedia is? And is it fair to even pull from one source? And so it is an understatement to say that we need to be taking a step back and doing a better job at educating our youth about that.
We have time for one more question. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Right here on the first table here. Yes. Sorry.
Hi. I would like to talk about how the news and how the media seems to reinforce polarization. And one thing that, Jesse, you were saying that media should have responsibility. And then Kevin, you're talking about that after World War II that that museums were created to show that there was there was a common humanity, and I thought that was really brilliant. Is there a way to do that with media, with the news, so that people can hear different voices, so we're not always having the same echo chamber? Is there and I know it has to be entertaining of some sort, but there's so many different voices. There's not one voice. There's not always the one correct answer.
Yeah. So I would just quickly respond. So one thing that we've tried to do at Quartz, which is 4 years old, is hire a staff that's really global. So our journalists speak 40 different languages, have reported from 115 different countries, and are based around the world today. So, you know, part of understanding the nuance of points of view, it's actually really powerful if you've grown up in a different place or lived in a different country, been part of another culture. You start with a just basic understanding that there are other ways of seeing things, that it's sometimes hard to sort of break through that, but there are rewards for doing so and finding a common ground with people who are not like you. So that's among the things that we're doing. It's possibly not as relevant to like the political coverage of the US, but I think is really important for how you go about a journalistic endeavor. What's interesting is that I think Facebook has taken this, what you've just said, among the things that they're doing is starting to experiment with ways to show you different views, which Mark, I think, was unwilling to confront, you know, as recently as this fall. But so in the French elections, when you're looking at an article about one candidate's view or from one candidate, when you click back to Facebook, they would show you, here are the views of all the candidates on this position. Facebook now has said publicly that they're experimenting with something they call like discover or explore. And the idea is it's not optimized for the things that you click on. It's actually designed to show you news sources that are different from the ones that you traditionally go to. And so I think your question is the right one. And we'll see if Facebook actually follows through on this. But the most powerful news platform of today is engaging, at least in thinking about that question.
And I don't mean to get defensive of the media, but I also think that question really needs to be taken in a broader context as well, and that we need to keep in mind that we're developing products and services that keep us from having to deal with human beings in any tangible way. So to expect the media to sort of overcompensate for that and help us to understand each other better at the same time as we actually have to deal with each other less is too broad.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great. Thanks.
Charles, Kevin, thank you so much. I like that idea, by the way.
Thank you.
Jesse, Michael, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, yeah, good, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Oh, can I have that for you? Okay, I'll take it off. No, I got it. It's heavy. I just like it over there. Okay. John, you want to join me on stage? So this morning, when we had our session on New York, one of the things that actually came up later as well, this idea that every company is a technology company, and that New York, among its many advantages, is all the disparate industries we have here that are global in scale and are simultaneously realizing that they are tech companies. I mentioned in that session that we had a really great example of that coming on stage later this afternoon. And here we have John Martin, CEO of Turner, which, as you'll hear, is really taking some radically new ways of thinking about what a cable network is. And probably it's not the right term anymore. But so what do you call your company? Maybe that's the way to start it in this environment. What should we think?
For those, by the way, thank you for having me here, and good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks so much.
For anyone who's not familiar with our company, our company was founded by Ted Turner. It's historically been an advertising-supported television network company. I'm responsible for networks such as CNN, Headline News, TNT, TBS, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, True TV, Turner Classic Movies, and a few others. And what I think I was trying to make the point is, and I became the chairman and CEO of Turner in the beginning of 2014, and given the trends that are happening in the traditional ad-supported television business, which is being influenced by new entrants that are such as a Netflix or a Hulu or an Amazon that are investing in original content, we can't survive successfully if we merely keep doing the same thing that made the company successful over the last 10 years. And we are a successful company. We have the #1 network in TBS, #4 network in TNT, the #1 network with millennials. We reach 80% of all adult millennials in the United States every month. CNN is the fastest growing news network in the United States. I mean, so there's a lot to crow about. Having said that, there's been a dramatic decline in barriers to entry in the television business. There's been an explosion of more highly produced and quality programming than ever before. And as a result of that, we're in an arms race and a war to fight for what is arguably the scarcest resource that human beings have, which is their time. We need fans. So we're literally in the midst of innovating and transforming the company from the inside out. And so historically in the TV business, you would look at overnight ratings that Nielsen would supply you, which gave you viewers of adults 18 to 34 or adults 18 to 49 and how many people watched your channel. And that's how that became the currency of the business to sell in advertising. What I've been saying to our employees now is, okay, viewers are great. And TV is a great reach vehicle because we aggregate lots of viewers. But we need fans. We need people that love our brands, that love our shows, that love our franchises, that love our branded environments, and who would be willing to come back to us over and over and over and over again. And the one personal example that I always typically use is, I don't know, does anybody like Game of Thrones?
A few people.
Like HBO could put anything, anywhere on Game of Thrones, and I'm there. And I'd pay money for it. I would spend the time for it because I'm a fan.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah, well, I asked you on the phone, Hulu sort of been struggling along for a while. You guys are among those invested in it. And now it has Handmaid's Tale, and wow, it's like transforming its image in the whole ecosystem.
Well, a hit show could do that.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing about the business.
So, and really going back to your issue of the battle for attention, I mean, this is becoming a huge topic in the tech industry itself because Facebook and Google in particular are your real enemies there because they are so good at commanding attention. As one pundit has been saying recently, they each have like 1,000 engineers whose whole job is to figure out how to keep your attention and keep you from clicking away. So you have to have a very strong pull to get people to do something different. But obviously you have some very powerful brands and networks that are doing that.
Well, we do, and I appreciate your kindness in the way you asked the question. But one of the things that has dramatically changed over the last several years at Turner is we realize that we have to become much, much more capable and sophisticated in technology. So it used to be that we would have our signal that would get, sent up to a satellite, and then we called it a day because we were a wholesaler, and we were in business with cable satellite telco partners. By the way, these partners pay us $5.5 billion a year. We love them. And there has always been an argument in the media business or in the video content business, is content king or is distribution king? And now I would submit that neither one of them independently are king, because the third leg of the stool, which has become incredibly clear, is the consumer experience is just as important, if not more important, sometimes than the quality of the premium content itself.
And intertwined with both aspects of that equation. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So as a wholesaler, historically, we've been very limited in terms of how we've been able to influence the consumer experience because we've been dependent on cable, satellite, and telcos to innovate. And so, I don't know how many people here. I could take a shot at one of the cable companies, can't I?
Yeah,
we gotta have a little bit of fun.
We
here.
love that. The more, the better.
Yeah, so I'm a Time Warner Cable customer, which now got bought by Charter. By the way, the service hasn't gotten any better. Like, the experience sucks. And
we all love our cable networks, don't we? Don't we love our cable networks so much?
No, the experience sucks. They're not innovating. They're not focused on what the consumers want and what matters. So I wanted to watch HBO Go 2 weeks ago, which is advertised to me as a free service by virtue of being a Time Warner Cable customer, which now is on my Charter. And it took me 45 minutes. I couldn't figure out how to get HBO Go to work. Then I said, all right, well, I like Homeland, so maybe I'll try Showtime Go. Another 45 minutes, couldn't figure out how to get that thing to work.
Yeah.
So I wasted 90 minutes, and then I went to Netflix and watched a pretty good TV show.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's what we're competing against. So ultimately, what I've been talking about as a CEO of Turner is over the longer term, we are going to need to be responsible, I believe, for owning and controlling the end-to-end consumer experience.
Okay, but didn't you say those people give you $6.5 billion?
5.5.
5.5. Okay, 5.
It should be 6.5.
1 billion.
No, now that you said it should be 6.5, we'll get working on that tomorrow.
So you got to hold on to that revenue.
Yeah, no, that's the balancing act.
Yeah,
right?
that sounds hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard job.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit of the prisoner's dilemma, right? I mean, that's how do you innovate and serve ultimately what the consumer is going to expect? Because the consumers are going to ultimately move to the experiences that they know and love. And I think, video content in general across the United States, consumption is increasing. But it's happening in different ways, right? And more of it is happening on these things. And 5-7 years ago, if somebody told me that adults would have the patience to watch a full-length movie on one of these, I would be like, good luck with that. Because I'm an 80-inch on the wall guy. But you know what? They are. And
soon in their glass.
The fastest, exactly. And the fastest growth in video consumption over the next 5 to 7 years is going to be in mobile. So we, thankfully, as you kindly said, we have strong brands, but more and more we need to figure out how to get our brands in front of where consumers want to experience them. So CNN, as an example. I hope everybody watches. There's no Fox News fans here.
There probably are, but you know what?
Please
everyone here probably watches CNN, even if they also watch Fox
okay.
stuff.
Well, this is a relatively young group, so I don't think anybody could watch Fox News. I'm having a little fun.
CNN plays a major role in the media ecosystem.
That was a joke. I'm sorry, that was a bad joke. But if you look at the average age of the adults in the United States who watch CNN, the linear network, it's 58 years old. 3 years ago it was 62. So we're actually bucking the trend in the television ecosystem by getting younger. And we're working hard at that. So it's 58 on TV. The average age of an adult in the United States who watch or consume CNN on their desktop, CNN.com, is 48. Then, if you go to a mobile device, the average age of somebody who's consuming CNN on a mobile app is 38.
Wow, that's interesting.
And then, if you say, because my daughter's 19 years old, she's a sophomore at NYU. I had her when I was 3. She interacts with CNN, but she does 2 things in the morning when she wakes up. She goes to Instagram, and she goes to Snapchat. So she's consuming news via Snapchat, and the average age of somebody consuming CNN on Snapchat is 27. So we have to think about how to capture audiences across decades worth of genres. And what's really critically important is you have to think about it very, very differently, because the CNN experience on Snapchat is significantly different from what the CNN experience would be on the TV.
But going to your earlier point, you're controlling the interface and the direct customer connection on all of those age groups except for the oldest one.
Correct, although Snapchat is, we have a lot of input into that. But yes,
you designed a Snapchat
digital
channel or whatever, right?
Yes, and Jeff Zucker, who runs CNN, is doing an incredibly fantastic job in what is a very tough job. But the discussions that he and I have with respect to the importance of the CNN brand, we have to have nothing short of the best digital products in the world. And that's still very, very much a work in progress. But yet we've been, number one overall in terms of news service with CNN, number one in politics, number 3 with CNN Money. I mean, we're starting to move into verticals, and I'm really proud of what the brand permission of CNN has and how that can travel globally. And when you can compare it to those news organizations that people most often compare CNN to in the United States, almost none of them have a significant digital presence, and none of them are really global. So we're doing fine.
Yeah, well, you're so global, it's true. Couple of quick things I want to hit before we go to the audience, but I want to hear from them. But one thing that, well, first of all, you told me on the phone that you had experienced sort of a prototype beta video distribution thing when you were in Atlanta. Is that something you could talk about, like what might be coming, that kind of thing, and how it could possibly work?
Yes. So yeah, I'll talk about it for a few minutes. Jeremy Legg, our Chief Technology Officer, if anybody really wants to know how it works, go see him.
I'm not talking about the detailed mechanics, but the idea that there's almost an internet-like way.
But here's the idea.
Yeah.
The idea is that very soon, very, very soon, we will be able to, by virtue of combining the traditional broadcast and IP stacks, video stacks, we will be able to essentially serve different versions of linear television networks to consumers.
Over the cable system?
Yes. So if I've got, let's say I've got 2 kids who are Cartoon Network viewers, one's a female, one's a male. The female loves Powerpuff Girls and the male loves Teen Titans. We will be able to understand over time through a variety of mechanisms who's watching the TV, and we will be serving linear video content to those individuals based on the probability that they will have a higher likelihood of wanting to watch it. That's a crazy idea in the TV business.
Well,
it's never been done before.
It keeps the cable systems in the loop to keep paying you that $5.5 billion too.
Well, no, they're going to have to pay us a lot more.
Okay, they pay you more. Cool, fine. But now, is that because the cable systems also provide the internet access typically that's possible?
Well, it's internet-connected TVs. So if you have an internet-connected TV, whether the cable system's providing it or some other, I mean, anybody, you just need an internet connection.
So that kind of, you predict we will be experiencing your channels that way within a not distant future?
How long? One year?
Wow, that's very cool. Okay, the other quick thing I wanted to ask you about
write that down. That's going to be in your incentive comp goals for next year.
One of the things that most surprised me when I was prepping, I actually went to hear John speak at another talk recently, is his commitment to esports, which how many people here have never heard of esports? Okay, there's a fair number. What is it and why are you committed to it?
Well, I hadn't heard of it much before a couple of years ago. Somebody came and said, we have this incredible first mover advantage idea in esports. And I said, well, what the hell is that? And now I have a 10-year-old son. This is all this kid does, except when I constrain him and try to make him do homework and eat vegetables. But the idea of esports is individuals, viewers, fans, watching professional gamers.
Video gamers.
Yeah. Play video games. So whether it's Minecraft or, any of the competitive games that are being broadcast, it is I didn't know. It is an enormous viewer phenomenon.
It's been a stadium
huge
thing
secular
in South
growth.
Korea for a long
They're
time.
selling out arenas.
Yeah, arenas. Yeah, but now
So
where's your
because
business
when my son goes, well, Dad, that guy's an athlete. I'm going, well, no, he's not. He's a video gamer. But he is an athlete. He's an e-athlete because his skills are better than anybody else who's actually trying to do that.
And where do you make money on that, though? Where's the business there?
Well, we are the broadcast partner, the license partner for the television rights, and we also broadcast on Twitch some of the
Which is owned by
largest
Amazon,
tournaments.
right? Isn't Twitch owned by Amazon?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but we get paid from them.
Good.
So, yeah.
So they're the distributor in that case.
Yeah.
Okay, I just had to get you mentioning that because I thought it was so. Who has a question for Jean or a comment? Okay, back there, please identify yourself. Take the mic.
Hi, I'm Charlene Flick.
Hi.
Hi, I'm a technology attorney, and I'm also the, I know, sorry. And I'm also the founder of New York's virtual reality content creators.
Okay.
And lately I've been immersed in VR and AR, and I want to know if you've, I know that you have, you've had some experiments, but I want to know to what extent and if you have faith in the medium.
Great question, because
I
if you don't
have
say
beyond
yes, you're in
faith.
trouble.
I was just going to say, and you've heard me talk about this before. You know, when 3D came on and everybody thought that 3D was going to transform the television business, I never believed it. VR is something that's completely different. It's like going from a 56K modem to broadband. Now, it's not going to be applicable for every single video content experience, but when you're in a virtual reality or an augmented reality or, you know, type of environment, it is a game changer in terms of what the experience is and the applications that we might be able to run through that. So we are trying to move at Turner quickly to try to figure out, but a lot of it admittedly is experimentation. What video lends itself to appropriate VR experiences? How do we make money on it? Who do we work with in terms of a hardware solution? And, but I think it's going to be enormously huge. And, you know, so, I mean, yes, I've seen Cartoon Network VR stuff. I've seen gaming VR stuff. But one of the most incredible VR experiences I saw was a CNN one where I was essentially dropped off on a street in Afghanistan. And I was standing next to an international correspondent. And I mean, it really sort of messes with your brain a little bit. But it was unbelievable. It was really unbelievable. So I think we are in the very, very, very early stages of understanding the power and the impact that this technology can have on our business. But I believe, because again, I believe in the consumer experience, and if consumers are fans and they get great experiences, then they're going to spend time and they're willing to spend money. And I think VR is going to be, and AR are going to be hugely impactful. And I'm in love with my Alexa too.
Oh, so you're going to have CNN content on there? Is it on there already?
We already do, yeah.
You say what? Do you have to invoke the skill first, and then you?
Well, what's the skill? Alexa, play CNN.
You just say it. Okay.
Yeah.
You can do that.
What's the latest? You know, Alexa, give me a hug. She goes, sadly, I have no arms.
Well, what do you think?
Like
Okay, wait. Hey, okay.
That's the most disappointing.
I got a cutting edge question for you. Since Amazon just last week announced that Alexa is going to have a screen, I already ordered 2 of them the day they announced it because I thought that was so cool. Is that a place where CNN content might flow?
Possibly. I'm not
I mean, I think
familiar enough.
Probably
to know
nobody
exactly.
knows. I'm sure they haven't licensed that opportunity to you yet, but you would be interested, I would assume.
Yeah, it was another opportunity to deliver video over IP.
Okay.
Sure.
Who'd had their hands? Okay, please. Yeah, you asked a good question before, so ask a good one now.
Does that mean if it's a bad question, I don't have to answer it?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So I'm really interested in esports and AR and VR, but the question that just popped into my mind is I think a few weeks back, Hearst announced that 25% of their profit came from business services and like floor wax and stuff. Are there aspects?
Floor wax?
Are there aspects of your business that aren't necessarily focused on leading edge technology development where maybe to everyone's surprise, quite a bit of your profitability comes from? Maybe like old world stuff or things that aren't.
Well, I appreciate the question. It is a good question. And one of the areas where I think we have not executed as well as we should be executing is in traditional consumer products, licensing and merchandising, and experiential types of services. So in Thailand, we have a Cartoon Network water park. In Abu Dhabi, we have a Cartoon Network water park. We ought to be
so there you go.
immersing consumers, again, this is about fans. So if we can actually tap into fandom, and if we have opportunities then to sell people stuff, whether it's T-shirts or dolls or go to a theme park, or we're going to be trying to do a lot more of that.
Okay, one more. Here. Right behind you. There it is.
I didn't know where you were. I just wanted to make a comment. I don't have a question.
That's good.
But I have lived abroad all my life, and I wanted to highlight for you the importance of CNN Global and how you have an incredible opportunity to influence people, because in odd parts of the world, everybody watches CNN. And that really is the news, the news that people respect. So I just wanted to throw that little pat on the back.
Well, I appreciate the comment, and this is going to sound like I'm playing to the question, but there has never been a time in this world, I think, in the history of the world, where CNN's journalistic mission has not been as important as it is right now. And that's true inside the United States, but it's also true outside of the United States. And one of the things I think people underappreciate is we spend a couple of $100 million more per year than any other news organization globally on news gathering and programming. And we do that by choice and on purpose, because when there is news breaking around the world, we want to have more resources in more places to be able to bring those stories to consumers. And the world is getting smaller every day. People are more and more connected. And I couldn't be more proud of the position that CNN has. So I appreciate the comment. Thank you very, very much. And we're going to continue to do what we're doing.
And that's an upbeat note to end on, because that was really,
Thank you, David.
and that's true. Any of us who are traveling in the next few weeks would almost guaranteed turn on CNN International if we're outside the U.S., because you're going to have to watch what's happening in the next few weeks, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thank you for...
Thank you so much, John. Really good. Really cool.
Appreciate it.
I imagine you all are surprised to hear his digital thinking, because it's pretty intense. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's do this wild ISIS thing now. Okay, the military comes on stage now. And
I want to
Oz.
say hello from Michael Salerno.
Okay, so this is our last session. I know it's been a long day, but this will be worth it. I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists.
Keep going. Get in the middle, man.
Hey.
Hey, John.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
Good to see
Mythical
you.
one, right?
Yes, okay. Well, we have everybody here. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists. If you're going to talk, please step outside. Oz Sultan, who's somebody who's written for Techonomy on this very topic, and some of you may have read his article, quite trenchant article about combating ISIS in social media. Hey, Simone, wherever you are, quiet down the room if whatever you have to do. No, you got to go tell him to. And anyway, Oz is a social media marketing expert who is also very politically engaged and has worked in political campaigns and a lot of marketing efforts for major companies across the board. He's also a very active American Muslim in trying to convey what's really real about the Muslim experience in the world, and he's done a very good job. He's often on television talking about that, and he's quite insightful on those matters. Then the other two guys up here are quite different, although they work together. All three of these guys work together on the issue we're going to be discussing, so I want to hear how they explain that. But John Melcon, who's to Oz's left, leads the Center for the Study of Civil Military Operations at West Point and is responsible for the strategic vision of that. And what he's really interested in, and I think I really want to hear him talk to you about, because it was surprising to me when we talked, is the idea that the whole notion of military warfare is changing to become more inclusive, in effect, and that really even the idea that we have to think of the military over here and civil society over here may be outdated. So that's a very interesting notion. And finally, Colonel, wait, what's your first name? I didn't get
John. Yeah.
John Graham, yes.
Yeah, Graham.
John and John, it's right. John Graham, he's West Point's Associate Dean for Research and Chief Scientist and former Director of the Network Science Center there. And he is just retiring from the Army right now, right?
Couple more weeks, yeah.
How many more weeks? Two more weeks?
Couple more.
Okay,
yeah.
well, thank you for being here. I know it's a hectic time. So I think
what I wanted to do was just maybe like a 2-minute
Yeah.
introduction to all
I
of
was
this.
going to say, Oz is going to start with a couple of quick thoughts and a couple slides, and you're going to make it fast, right?
Very fast.
Okay, good.
So everyone here is familiar with the Arab Spring, a bunch of things that have happened over the past couple of years, but not a lot of people are familiar with what terrorism is or how terrorism's changed. So it's gone from where it literally was like a book handed in between two different people, like, oh, you want to start a terrorist group? Great, here's a book. To in the 1990s, Al-Qaeda had basically started going into the digital foray. And with ISIS, what we have done is we have gone full digital. So what I want you to think about is Publicis has maybe about 800 people working in social media. ISIS has 1,000, okay? And this is globally. And so the entire nature of warfare has changed. The entire nature of engagement has changed. And so what did that mean? So what we did was I basically personal money, working with a couple of quants, have spent about 2 years worth of research figuring out, everyone keeps saying it's Muslim people are joining ISIS. Well, who exactly is joining ISIS? And what we came up with was the profile of the Jillennial. So these are jihadi millennials across the globe who are largely in Western countries, including the United States. What you're looking at is simple factors that haven't really been addressed for a long period of time. They are disenfranchised. They are typically second or third generation if they are minorities. They are secular, and they are looking for meaning. And ISIS baits for this. Why? Because ISIS is basically Jim Jones with guns. In order to fight them, what have we been doing? So the way that we were doing this through social for a long period of time was, what do most brands do? What did most brands do when they failed for a long period of time? They're like, I need you to like my page, right? So the problem that we've had in spending billions of dollars out there is that there are people who are thinking that, okay, well, let's create a profile, not necessarily based on the information that we should have, and we talk about these things called face sitters, and they're getting people, if America is Coke and ISIS is Pepsi, they're getting people to like Coke while ISIS is getting them to drink Pepsi. And if you're not going to stop that process, nothing is going to change. And so this is going to be left up for the entire talk, and we can talk about this later. And here's the problem that's happening, because this is not just a problem for nation states. This is not just a problem for small countries. This is a problem for corporations and multinationals on an international level on an unprecedented basis. Your brand can be hijacked by ISIS. Toyota has already had to deal with this, okay? So what we've been working together with the Center for Civil and Military Studies at West Point is, how do you take social media counterterrorism and make it a brand new discipline that should be taught alongside a bunch of other disciplines? Because what's happened is marketing and terrorism got married and had an ugly baby, and we have to deal with it.
Wow, that's good. Well said. I don't think most people I mean, obviously we all ask ourselves, why did this terrorist or that terrorist decide to go do this crazy thing? And you're saying that many or most of them just saw something online and got excited about it because they were pissed off already with life?
They were pissed.
Punk rock, you're famous.
Okay, yeah. So here's the thing. Everyone in this room, name one thing that's edgy right now. Trump is edgy. Okay,
right?
Punk rock is edgy, all right? We don't have punk rock anymore. What we have is cults like ISIS selling their brand of punk rock online. Okay. And that's exciting. And the problem is the 1 and the 4 on this. This is where ISIS basically makes people make the pledge twice. And the only other people who do this are cults and the Boy Scouts. And they're not the Boy Scouts, so...
Okay, so let me just switch over to Colonel John. I will say Colonel John, can I call you that? Okay, so why are you up here with Oz, and what is it that you guys do together, given what he said? Because I think he contextualized the problem quite eloquently.
Right, so first I want to caveat, yeah, I am active duty military, and so I have some caveats I get to say or not say today. So I have kind of some notes I get to stick to because I was pretty brief before I got here about what not to say, because we have some sensitive areas we're going to talk about. I, like John, did our time early in the Army as airborne rangers, did things like that, and then we graduated up to doing what we're doing now, which is looking for bad guys, trying to influence the battlefield through other methods. And so we moved in that. My space that I operate is in networks. And so where Oz and I actually butt heads, that's kind of what we try to do. And that ties to what we're trying to do in the government, we're trying to do in the military, is these public-private partnerships. We need the outside ideas that will butt up against our ways of thinking. And mine has been formed from multiple tours downrange in different places. And then trying my ideas out there. And then now he has the new ideas we're bringing to bear. Now, a couple things, though, that I want to throw in that I somewhat disagree with Oz on is because my science is network science, and what I'm looking at is I look at the nodes. I'm not doing your networks or computer networks. I do social networks. And what I'm looking at is the nodes, the relationships, and it's basically the matrix algebra that we all took from lesson 3 to 8 back in entry-level algebra. Simple matrix algebra that has been taken to the next level. And I think it's the basis of a lot of machine learning and the directions we're going there that we talked about earlier. But what I disagree with Oz on, and we work hard on this, is there a relationship between what's going on online? What is your online behavior translating to real-world behavior? And some of the arguments that I see and we're constantly looking at, so one that I love is that just recently happened. The cast of Hamilton got up and kind of gave a speech to Vice President Pence following their show, and I think it made all the news. If you missed it, then you weren't watching the channel that was up here before us. And then they said, well, how many of you voted? 70 members of the cast were up there on the stage. How many of you voted? And it was 6. Wow. 6 members of the cast had voted. So there was a real difference between action and the like. And as we go through, we can find that example over and over and over. Your online behavior, that identity that we talked about earlier today, is a different identity than you might have in real life. And we're looking right now for a way for those things to go together. Why is this hard? From the science. The science is why this is hard. It's not your computer science, which my degrees in Carnegie Mellon is in computer science, but our problem is with the social sciences. And where we are is cognitive science, where I did some of my work. I've got to account for about 80–90% of the variance to be published. So I will say, hey, Grasshopper, pick this out of my hand, and I can predict how fast you'll pick it out of my hand. And I can do that pretty well. Good job. Yeah.
But I think that's, where we've had these conversations is, so again, online behavior, offline persona, right? Could be completely different things. We've seen a lot of Reddit stories that it's completely different. But what happens when you're talking about ISIS, and not just ISIS, Boko Haram, Jamaat Islamiyah, ISIS-K, which is Waliyat Khorasan, which is in Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, not Waziristan, what used to be NWFP now, is that as opposed to going online and shit posting and doing a bunch of stuff that you normally would do, what they do is they make you make a pledge to them. When you come in, they initially make you make a pledge to them, and that's the first thing. Then the next thing they do is instead of you saying you have an online community, they sell you your new friends. Okay, so standard cult recruitment tactics. Beyond selling you your new friends, they then tell you that people that you do know who are Muslims, if you do know Muslims, you have to, and other people of other religions, you have to excommunicate them. And then they make you indoctrinate yourself again by pledging allegiance. So this is, and I think this is where we've been kind of, butting heads, but getting to on this, is that through the social nodes, what you see as traditional behavior is disintermediated by this cult-type behavior. And you're not necessarily seeing this recruitment just with ISIS. You're seeing this with Antifa. You're seeing it with a variety of other groups that are out.
What is that?
Antifa is the anti-First Amendment groups that are out there. So this is what we would call the extreme left that has fragmented off from the Democratic Party. They follow similar patterns. I'm trending, and we're doing a lot of data analysis on them now. But it's a similar recruitment strategy.
Okay, but I want to hear more what the Army thinks in terms of, we think of the Army as having guns, right? And it sounds like, and you have guns.
We got the biggest guns in the fold.
Both of these guys have carried around a lot of guns. In fact, this John, I don't know about that John, but this John was one of the first 100 people in Afghanistan and has seen some serious combat. But so But to what degree are you now thinking, if ISIS is the enemy, and other groups like it and people like it? I mean, it's not just one thing. Obviously, Oz just listed a number of different groups, and I know there's 40 or 50 of these that are of substantial scale worldwide. How much is the Army thinking that your job is, at least in part, becoming fighting these people online? Is that essentially what you were starting to say before, either one of you?
Well, let me jump in right now and say that I don't want to be the wet blanket in the room or whatever else, but I am the slow move of bureaucracy. It's called the United States military. It's the Department of Defense and things we have going on now. And so the great ideas that we do, like we have a wonderful incubator at West Point, and the opportunity, because we are a degree-granting baccalaureate institution, that we can actually do that, and we're sort of Army light, so we can engage in these conversations. The big Army has a hard time. I mean, it's a monolith. I mean, it turns only at like small azimuths, and so we're always trying to figure out how do we get ahead of these things and how do we do it. And that's the frustration that I have, and what I'm trying to promote, particularly with our center. And what we're doing right now is how do we actually get involved in these public-private partnerships, as John alluded to earlier? How do we involve our proponents in business and technology and other places to actually bring it in? Because the days are gone when the skunk works out in the West, when Rand Corporation can actually build beautiful spy machines that run the air or whatever else. They're gone now. I mean, it's an incubator that happens in a garage, in a basement, someplace else. And so I think it's the public sector, or the private sector actually, can bring it to the public side. So how do we integrate that? How do we do that, and how do we stay ahead of it? And how do we integrate that into the way in which we educate? How they do it to the way in which we, because I'm thinking of .plmf. Help me with that one. Doctrine, operations, training, something military.
See how much we're committed to it.
He's not in the Army anymore, so he can forget.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, but this is it. This is how we get caught in these things, or whatever else, because we can't integrate fast enough. And so I think the key thing, particularly with this issue, is that we only have so many things we can do right now. President Trump just put together a budget that has gone forward and included $8.5 billion that went towards, particularly towards the PACOM and the Pacific Command. And there's all tranches that go in other places and everything else. And either way, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough space to do it. And so,
well, this is where I want to throw in. Go to Oz's model that's on the wall. And I love the question that came to our predecessor. Hey, you're in multiple countries. Get out there and spread the right message. So I'm in the government. Can I, as a member of the government or the government, go spread the right message? In the military, I have some issues with that, right? I got some authorities that say I can't do that, and I can't even experiment on it. To do what Oz has laid out as a model is, from an academic perspective, a social experiment like that is against academic and, for that matter, government rules for me to conduct that experiment on you.
In what sense? What is it that you couldn't do?
So, can I inject? Has your company ever done a phishing experiment on you? So they intentionally sent you a fish to see if you were stupid enough to click on it, right? To do that, they went through multiple levels, and they could get away with it because you signed a bunch of consents when you joined your company.
Yeah.
We can't do that in the world. So to test these models, we need folks that are engaged in marketing, folks that are engaged in these kind of fields in the public to tell us this model works, this model doesn't work. Because we're going after ideas, and Oz has laid it out very nicely, of a cult theory, a cult model. We need those tested with the proxies that you have. And the proxies you have are marketing. What shoes am I going to buy? Does my online behavior translate to real-world action in some form?
So is one of the reasons why you two guys would want to speak in a context like this because you want people from the business and tech community to kind of get behind in what you're doing in some way, that you need to build a broader kind of army of armies, so to speak?
Yeah. Absolutely. This is a unique field because we're doing sociology mixed with the tech field. The tech field I can do all day. I can design a network. We can design some cool identity, blockchain. We can do all these things. But who's going to conduct the experiments that say this works, this doesn't work?
Okay.
And what I was just going to add, and what I am, and really inside of this is is basically the blade of the spear, okay? I've got a lot of research into this. We've got the methodologies. We've got the ways that you can fight this stuff online. But this has to be done in between two types of partnerships. One is the public-private partnership, because in private, we can do, you've seen what advertising companies do to test you, okay?
Happens fast, right?
You see what's done with, just inside of inter-browser interrogation of cookies and that sort of stuff, just on the starting level, not to talk about Facebook. But where this has to go is I'm putting together a group of super imams in New York City, which help influence about 400 million Muslims internationally. And the idea is that we have to build a counter-narrative on one side that I can help leverage to execute through marketing channels, because this is all marketing, right? And then we have to partner with military in a way to do this. And the longer-term partnerships is figuring out how we do this, not just with marketing groups and communication groups, but what we do with news, what we do with intelligence, and longer-term, how we educate corporations. And to that end, we're putting academic partnerships together as well.
Okay. Well, you know, John, when we were talking, you were expressing some frustration, which I guess you indicated it a little before with your thumbs up, at your ability thus far to get people in the private sector to really join in this effort. Is that
Biting my lower lip here? What was an indication of my frustration?
So is it because companies and the private sector doesn't understand it? Is that part of it? Is it because they're reluctant to get involved? What's the impediment?
No. I mean, again, I am just. Again, John can attest to this because his couch is my therapist couch. I go in all the time, and I can only headbutt my way through a bureaucracy. This is the frustrating part of it, and I think we're coming to grips with this as we're becoming integrated between the military and between some of the other efforts that are going on. And again, you can see it happen right now in Silicon Valley with some of the things we have going, that we're just so slow to move. And we can talk about it all day long or whatever else, but it's a sausage making, whatever.
In other words, the government itself is too slow, but then at the same time, the private sector is not jumping up to help either.
Well, no. I mean, I believe that the private sector, again, public-private, whatever else, public being the government side of us, but private being the free enterprise system, is willing to do it, and they're making technology, they're making advantages, they're making things happen, and we need to integrate it quickly, whatever else, and become a part of it.
Well, I was just going to add, because this is what's going on right now.
What? Yeah,
outdated marketing, outdated models, working on likes, not conversion.
Well, it's interesting though. A number of times today we've talked about a number of topics, but something that's come up quite a few times is Mark Zuckerberg's overlong essay in February about what he wants Facebook to become long term. And you got to say, among other things, if you take what he's saying in there seriously, he wants to help you guys. Right. I mean, he's making that very clear. Now, exactly what the means would be, how openly he could do it, and also he's got to be careful that he doesn't violate his trust with his own customer, which is a very big deal.
We'll jump in on John's piece. Is that so for anybody that is interested, yes, we have a thing called Defense Innovation Unit X, experimental, and it's DIUX. You can look them up. Glad to connect you if you have a great idea. That's what we are looking for, those good ideas to come into our system, and we've set up a system outside of our system to try to bring them in. Where I think we're hurting, from my experience with them, with DARPA and with others, is getting the cutting edge organizations like Mark Zuckerberg to come on board and say, I will fight through your bureaucracy and partner with you.
And this is what I was going to say, is that it's Madison Valleywood, I think was the term that was given last year. They got everybody together, and between advertising, between marketing, Apple and Twitter, and everybody were sitting at the table with us and having these conversations with government leaders about how to do it. And I mean that's it. I mean we're all linked.
Have you ever had those meetings?
Well, I mean, I've had an opportunity with us. I think I talked to Oz about this. I talked to him as well with us. There's a period of time when I was actually doing a little bit of work with Twitter, and we talked about here was my caveat to Twitter at the time, whatever. So they just gone through. So Twitter had gone through their IPO, and they were $41 billion, right? Instantly, money rained from Goldman Sachs and everywhere else, and so suddenly a bunch of kids who are sitting around, forgive me for my shoes here or whatever else, but like we're sitting around like in flip-flops and sandals, whatever else, sitting in an office, suddenly like had multitude of money raining on them, plus an international a stage by which they were doing things. At the same time, there was a revolution that was going on in Iran. And so suddenly, there's people on the streets, there's a green revolution that's happening in Iran, or whatever else, and the Twitter feed drops. And they're all sitting around, and everybody's worried, whatever else. The National Security Council sitting around in Washington, D.C., whatever else, and the feed goes dry, and like they're waiting for the feeds, they're waiting for the tweets, they're waiting for these things to happen, or whatever else, and nothing's happening. It was like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? Like, well, they were just down for servicing for 30 minutes. Like, wait a minute, you guys are international players. I mean, you are akin to like any, Ministry of Information for for one of the top 5 countries in the whole globe, and yet you're like down for the count. I mean, so that.
Well, they turned it back on at the request of the U.S. State Department.
Well, that's it. Again, what I'm getting at is that, like, that's where we have to be sitting at that table. But that's a tough thing too. Again, because I've espoused my own libertarian values about like what I do or don't give as a person. Whatever else we're willing to give up, and that's the mix.
But to that Madison Valleywood issue, and there's 2 other pieces inside of there. One is that the social media platforms and a lot of the marketers do not want to touch the liability issues in this because post San Bernardino, Facebook's getting sued. And secondarily, it's the same problem that you had when John Kerry got everyone in Hollywood together last year and said, we need more favorable content on Muslims. And you had a whole room of maybe about 50 people saying, maybe we should talk to some Muslims.
Imagine that.
Okay, so and so it's like you've got people like me here, we can speak to not just the cultural aspects of this, but even when it comes to this side of it, there's maybe me and there's like 1 or 2 other people who are doing this kind of research and bringing it to the table. And what we're looking to do is we're looking to partner to figure out how we solve it on this side, but it's also solving it on this side.
Okay, let me risk offending quite a few people in the room, but probably pleasing you because all day long people have said negative things about Trump. But one of the interesting things about Trump that I think he has demonstrated is he has no concern about the way things were done before. Right? He seems to be very eager to break through and just try new stuff, right? So given what you've been saying before about all the bureaucracy and slow-paced, and I know you you can say what you will, but Oz worked with the Trump campaign. He's a Trump supporter.
And then hold on, I did big data, and no, we have to qualify what I did.
Okay, the point is,
big data. We did social media.
I don't want to try to get you in trouble, Oz, but I'm just all I'm saying.
You can't just open that Pandora's box.
Okay, whatever. Okay.
I got guns. I'll defend.
Okay. The question is simply this: could it be a possible good thing that maybe in this current administration you could cut through some of that bureaucracy and try some new stuff? Because let's say, if there's one thing Trump has said he's committed to doing, it's fighting terrorism, right? So is there any evidence of movement there?
So, I mean, I would say we've already got movement. We've got, the paper just broke the story about what NYU has been doing for the military, or NSA and some others, over the last just broke, a couple weeks ago. So we've got some great partnerships for what universities in this region are doing with the military or with the DoD to advance research. So they don't, and that's kind of where our sweet spot is, and that's where this administration's already started. Previous administration had already kind of opened the doors. Is sometimes you think about doing work with the military and you think of it as operations. They're going to go do something with it and slaughter people, and we do that. But the other thing we do is we do research. So we actually say, here's our problem, here's what we're working on, this is the shaping we're trying to do. Would you work on it as a research topic? And once we get into that space, we have a lot more room to partner.
We know the Pentagon does technology-related work because they invented the internet, for God's sakes. I mean,
I thought that was Al Gore.
Let's remember that. No, I mean, it is true. The military invented the internet. That's not something to forget. I think we should get comments and questions. Okay, over here. Can we get a mic over there? Do we only have one working mic or what? I'm sorry, this guy's getting so much exercise.
We lost one in action.
Thank you for your good exercise.
Hi, so Rich Robbins. 2 things I'm hearing. One is that the military is very bureaucratic and slow. And second, that this is basically a marketing campaign that we're fighting against ISIS. Why is this being done by the military?
Why is or isn't?
Why would the military be conducting a marketing campaign, which, if anything, seems like more of a diplomacy effort?
It's not a diplomacy. So what had happened was it used to be terrorism, war, marketing, okay? And I'm talking to 2 universities right now about just creating new curricula for this, because what terrorism is marketing, advertising, communications, psychology. They've got technology in there now too, because they're getting into the ransomware space. And Bitcoin, because that's how they sell human capital.
And killing people. Yeah.
The killing people is almost secondary to a lot of what's going on here.
Let me say, so the Department of State has a wonderful program called CVE. It was the Obama administration created it in about 2010, and it's actually gained a little bit of weight. But this is, back to the bureaucratic side of it also, and I wish I had more answers than just complaints. But, it comes down to rice bowls and other things, and the Department of State is famous for saying all the time, well, we don't have as many counselors as the Army has band members.
Yeah.
And, but at the same time, Bob Gates stood up there and said, hey, I'm prepared to go ahead and give you a portion, a tranche of our entire budget for you, the state, to go ahead and leave your white-shoed halls and your embassies and go out and, conduct in bureaucracy, excuse me, not bureaucracy, forgive me, I'm just inundated with it, but engage in diplomacy, in the countries that we're involved in. And they were unwilling to take it on.
But wait a minute, what's the acronym?
Oh, countering violent extremism.
Okay, good. Thank you for that, because that's kind of, we don't
sorry,
like acronyms that are not fun.
But so again, back just to answer your question, whatever else, I think in the short term, whatever else, is that state is working on it, and we're getting better at working together in the interagency process, and I think it'll bode well. Because I'm an optimist.
But there's private sector folks like us applying for the CVE, but this is also a labyrinthical process.
But also, as just John's point, and both Johns have talked about, the public-private partnership. We've heard a lot today on the stage about the problem of silos, the problem of departments and functional areas of companies not cooperating, and that the effective strategy and the effective way to understand the world and also to accomplish innovation of all sorts is to break through the historic barriers and silos and really work across. So really, we need state and Army and private sector and marketing. I mean, let's face it, the Army has the most money. I mean, they may not think they have enough, but they're getting more than ever in this administration. So maybe that's just the answer. I mean,
well, let me just throw in this.
The Pentagon has never had a huge problem getting money.
No, but let me back up. Is this? I've spent time with the State Department in Africa and Afghanistan, and God bless them, love them for what they do. But the organization just has a different philosophy, right? They're working on diplomacy. It has a certain pace, has a certain rate. I am right now, as a military officer, looking at 1,000 cadets. We graduate in a week, and they're going to go around the world to go wherever whatever administration we voted in wants them to go, and that's where they're going to go spend their lives. I, as a senior officer, would like to shape the conditions so that when they get there, it doesn't happen. I'll always remember my first company command, 82nd Airborne Division. I'm ready to go jump into Haiti. And out of the 82nd, my job going into Haiti was actually to slaughter people in a region to stop them from doing what they were doing. And thank goodness, Carter flew in and landed his plane and wouldn't leave until he converted Haiti to a different philosophy. And then instead of us going in 82nd, we sent in a 10th Mountain Division, much lighter, easier, kinder force, and we did it very differently. We would like to, it's different. Internet didn't exist back then, not like this. Now we're in a new place. I want to shape
phase zero.
I want to shape things.
It's phase zero.
Yeah.
You just ask a question, pass it to him, if we get time, but no offense. But
So at the Paley Center a couple of months ago.
Rick Smolin.
Rick Smolin. At the Paley Center a couple of months ago, there were 2 very interesting young women, one from Facebook and one from Google. Eric Schmidt had created something called Jigsaw, and they were explaining that the same people that you mentioned, Odds, that were searching certain terms that identified people that were feeling disenfranchised and might be attracted by the propaganda that ISIS has been creating very effectively, that Google is creating counter-narratives. And could you talk a little bit about what both Facebook and Google are doing?
Here's my problem with Jigsaw. Jigsaw has come across as very smug in terms of understanding not only Muslims, but understanding ISIS converts and understanding this cult methodology and what motivates them. And they don't. Because what you're not seeing is you should be seeing different search results. You should be seeing different advertising. You should be seeing different marketing. What the problem I think a lot of these companies have, and this is what we see from startup to enterprise a lot of times, is the startup makes something for the enterprise, and the enterprise is like, what is that? And that's the same thing that's happening in this field, is that they have made tools for advertisers, for advertising. But that doesn't have anything to do with countering violent extremism, nor is it actually focused enough. I mean, I put the call out to the entire room. Feel free to reach out to us because we're working on a social cyber maturity model and a ton of education. What I want to do is nothing but run around and preach the gospel of like, here's how you stop it, here's how you educate people on it, here's how you train people to do it, because this is not—
You're good at that, my friend.
Yeah, this is not a one-man show, this is not a three-man show, this is a million people show.
Now,
okay?
I want to support the smug statement, but differently, is that scientifically, they've not done the causal factors through. So again, social science right now, cognitive science predict 89% variance. Social science, if it's rock solid, 30%.
Right?
30%.
Wow.
So what are they out to